Yo, can you hear me? It's time to rise up, rise up. Ba-do-bo-bo-bo. Got a virtual cam up. Oh, thank you so much for the sub. Oh my god. Yo, one sec.
What's good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, just give me one quick second to get you on screen.
Alright, man. While you get that situated, I'll just tell you, like, how I do everything here.
Oh, people, I'm live right now, just so you know, people can hear you. Is that alright?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's fine. So, basically, podcast, conversation, that's how I do it. And talk about the issues. I am genuinely interested, as I was in your stream before, to talk about like what your vision of what the Democratic Party should be for the future. I do think that is a important conversation moving forward. But for the most part, do it, introduce the pod, allow you to introduce yourself. I'm gonna ask a question on like what makes you relatable, because I like to humanize the people I have on the podcast. And then we'll just get into the conversation.
Hell yeah, no, that sounds great. Everything's good on my end. The video is showing, so like if you have a feed, perfect. Oh look, I should have fucking worn a fucking suit and tie myself.
You good, my boy?
How you doing? So that all sounds good with me. I'm happy to get into it. And so folks know, it sounds like the focus of the conversation is going to be Democratic Party politics, USA stuff, right?
For the most part. I mean, of course, this is a free-flowing conversation, so no doubt it's going to relate to MAGA and the craziness that you've been doing. And I'm sure I haven't read the article yet, but I'm sure you saw the thing about the Trump and potentially pardoning people that's like 200 feet away from the White House.
Oh, no, I didn't read this article. Is this new from today?
All I know is I saw a social media post quoting something he said. So this is something that's definitely going to be on the grapevines. So,
well, I obviously would be I'm against pretty much all of Trump's pardons. I can't think of one that I agreed with, and so I'm even against the power itself as it's currently enacted in the Constitution. So, yeah, happy to get into that.
All right, excellent. Okay, with that said, that's pretty much how I do everything. Nothing complicated by any means. And since you're going to stream it yourself, of course, I don't care what you do with the content personally.
Word.
That said, any questions you got for me?
I'm all set. And it's just be aware, you are live now, and then also there's two of us, I think, right? Do you see the two of us? There's like us on the left and then us on the right.
Yeah, that's for vertical streaming. That's how streaming works.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm an idiot, all right?
Hey man, it's all good. It took me a while to learn all this stuff too. It's a process for sure. And to pronounce my name, it's Radell, and then the podcast I run is Purple Political Breakdown.
Got it.
Okay. All right. With that said, time to go. Start the podcast. All right. Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We're back at it again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with another podcast episode to have a great conversations of the craziness that's going on in society today. In order to have the conversation today, to talk about the Democrats, their identity, the loaded term that I'm sure you love, the coalition. There is this is an important conversation. I spoke to a few people about it before, and we'll probably address some of these things. But I do think moving past MAGA and the craziness by Trump, hopefully, we create a vision that inspires the people. And I do think that is a very important thing to know. So to have that conversation, my guy here, Pisco, I've watched him, of course. I watched Lib and Learn. I really do like what you guys do for the most part. Of course, there's disagreements here and there, but I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. Who are you and what are you about?
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I am a political streamer, I would say, influencer, legal streamer and influencer. I'm a lawyer who decided to, take a harder look at politics and spend more time covering stuff, usually from the perspective of like legal commentary, corruption issues related to constitutionality. But I will occasionally delve into policy and these internal debates, these struggle sessions that we have with ourselves. It seems like every couple months there's like a new version of it about what the identity should be of the opposition to Trump and the Democratic Party moving forward.
It does seem that way, and understandably so. The Democrats are not a monolith of ideology like the MAGA movement is, where it's basically what Trump says, it goes. There's so many different individuals here that have different visions for the betterment of America, and that can be good, but once it seems like it's like destroying and eating itself, that's when we really have to take a step back and go like, what is going on? Before we get into the nitty gritty to have this conversation, I always like to ask all my guests this. My audience knows at this point, what makes you relatable to the average person? What's a hobby you like? What's something you enjoy? For example, I'm a fan of sports. I'm a fan of anime. I'm a fan of nerd stuff, working out. So what is something like that that makes you be like, or that makes people go and look at you and go like, you know what? That's a normal guy.
I just got 100% on Hades 2. It was a really fun game. I don't know if you guys are gamers, but I love to game. I'm a big fan of the God of War series. I used to stream FIFA. So people back in the day, back in college, to like 6 or 7 viewers, I would stream FIFA as Pisco 95. I don't know if there's any OGs left from those days. But yeah, no. So I'm into sports. I got hobbies. I'm like into odd things that people like wouldn't expect. There's many layers to me. I like musicals. I will often quote musicals. Love movies. Love just chilling, grabbing a beer with the fam. But yeah, no, that's me.
I respect a lot of those things. Never been a FIFA guy. I'm always a Madden and 2K guy personally.
I love 2K. I love 2K. I love the classic teams on 2K. I love playing like Celtics 08. The Warriors team when they had Durant. I think that's made it as a classic team. I'm not sure about that though.
It should be the best team of all time.
Yeah. Who do you got in your top 5
for teams or players?
Players. So you go Jordan first.
Yes, Jordan first. I know LeBron fans are always going to be outside for that. LeBron can have number 2. I respect the longevity. I am a Luka fan, so of course I'm rooting for LeBron now. So
yeah.
Number 3, personally, on my personal list, if I'm talking about what I've seen and I think you're the best, I would put Kobe 3 personally.
Kobe 3. Wow. That is a controversial opinion among a lot of basketball like Reddit nerds, I would say. But he was.
Yeah, I think most people would say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which I understand it. If we're talking about overall basketball, he's arguably 1. If we're being serious, but I got Kobe 3. I think he is the best basketball player after I've seen LeBron and Michael Jordan. I'll put Kareem 4, and then I'll probably put Shaq 5, something like that.
Respectable there. And where do you have Curry? Just so I know where you're standing on the
Warriors. For sure.
Top 10. All right. Okay. Cool.
Like 9 or 8 for me. That dude is filthy. Nobody could deny that shooter right there for sure. Shout out, man. It's a little NBA talk. You'd love to see it.
We need to get more real talk from because when it's just lib shit, it can get stale after a while. You gotta, get some shit for the neutrals, for the normies.
For sure. I mean, I spoke with Z yesterday, funny enough, from
Okay.
Fuck America Tour. And one thing that we brought up in that conversation is that we need to ensure, or at the very least establish, that it's okay to be like normal and cool when it comes down to liberals. There is this kind of generalized notion, especially in like the late 2010s, where it's like all of them are just wokey and annoying and just always like policing everything you say. I mean,
Yeah.
South Park made a whole like stuff about the wokeness and PC
Yeah,
principle.
dude. They
It
made
can
a
be
meal of that too, and there's always this. There was a temptation to call South Park like a South Park conservative or whatever. I always thought it was a misnomer. I think that South Park in general goes after people who don't either have self-awareness or exist in a closed system of thought, which just creates absurdity and parody and contradiction. And that very much was around with some of these left movements. Again, not all of them. And I think it's easy to paint with a broad brush there, but yeah, certainly there was plenty to ridicule in that era.
Yeah, for sure. And South Park, honestly, they make fun of everybody. It doesn't,
Yeah.
and that's what I respect about them. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what political affiliation you're a part of. They're making fun of all of you and not holding back. But yeah, South Park was really funny. But the idea of just being more relatable, being more cool, it's okay to like all this normal stuff. It's okay to hang out. I mean, we talk about COD lobbies, for example.
Yeah.
Don't go too crazy. Sometimes they do go too crazy, but just having a good time it's okay and seem like you're a normal person. And that's one of the things that, again, we brought up, regardless of how you feel about him. And I truly do believe the idea that people relate to the guy is ridiculous, but people felt like Trump was like them.
Sure.
And it helped because he was on TV shows like The Apprentice. He was on the WWE, even though this guy was like a billionaire Nepo baby. He just like, oh, he's cool. He's funny. There's memes about him.
So he is definitely funny. Even recently in this like unhinged rant that he had about the 4 or 5 different critics from MAGA of the war, where he's like laying shit out. He just out of nowhere is like, well, Bridget Macron is hotter than Candace Owens. Just like a patently ridiculous, absurd, like petty thing to do. And so he'll still occasionally have like very funny aspects about him, but there is that weird kind of duality or contradiction in that he does seem relatable to a lot of people. Although he says certain things and does certain things that like no one else would do or say. Just like this whole tweet that he had on Sunday, open the fucking straight, you maniacs, praise be to Allah. Like that just is not a normal thing that people say on an Easter Sunday. Notwithstanding that, I think the openness or the lack of filter in some way is relatable to people, or was relatable for the longest time and felt like authenticity or realness.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that people attach themselves to this individual, and a lot of people are realizing pretty quickly that his behavior has been very damaging for the country overall. Moving on to the conversation itself, there's something valuable that I do think that is necessary for when we talk about Democrats, when we talk about liberals, and again, this is a conversation I brought up with Z. What exactly is the elevator pitch? What do they represent? What is their very clear motto when you attach it to themselves? Of course, they're going to abide by liberal principles and hopefully abide by principles that has the betterment of the people as the forefront. But it's hard for a lot of people to understand, like, what exactly are you doing? What exactly are you about? When it comes down to MAGA, despite I think them being very, very, very bad, you can understand exactly what their elevator pitch is and what they're going to be here and who they're going to represent. When it comes down to you and your opinion, what do you think that elevator pitch is, if it currently exists, or if it doesn't, what should it be?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I take an elevator pitch in the context of politics. It's often like, what do you tell as your 1 minute to an audience in some sort of hypothetical debate or something in front of like a mass audience of people, of lay people, of normal people, of average regular people. But also you have this notion of an elevator pitch, which is like directed at insiders, right? People who are going to invest in you. And that kind of conversation that I expect we're going to be having in a few minutes, that conversation is very different, where we're talking about like specific policies and ideals. And I think which one of those visions that you're talking about, or which one of those pitches that we're talking about, will change what the pitch is, right? I could tell you in a couple words, my elevator pitch is abundance, build, create, and all that. And you would understand instantly what I'm referencing and what kind of policies that I'm plugging into. There's a kind of common framework, an API. That's kind of an insider conversation. The elevator pitch for the outsider, for the average person, for the regular person, needs to be, I think, something approaching what a lot of these successful Dems have done in the interim period. Think about Mom Donnie. Like, I will make your insert your housing cheaper. Right? I will make your housing cheaper. Trump doesn't care about you. He cares about his billionaire donors and the Epstein class, something like what John Ossoff is approximating, where it really is a more populist rhetoric, us versus them, big picture. I'm going to lower your costs. I'm going to be worried about you. I'm not going to actually care about you. I'm not going to send you off to die in a useless war where we're raising the price on everybody, that kind of thing. So it really depends which of those visions you're talking about, the insider conversation or the outsider conversation. And I almost think the outsider conversation is too surface level to, and at some points there's some ideology, but is so general and so abstract that you might mistake some of the rhetoric that might be the best for Democrats for the sort of outsider pitch as right-wing populist talking points sometimes. It might be hard to place exactly what the ideological grounding is from that pitch.
And although I do agree that there is a difference in terms of the pitches, when it comes down to elections at the very least, and when it comes down to appealing to the people, the outsider pitch is more valuable and it's more important at the end of the day. So when it comes down to that, and there is that concern that begs a broader question, which I'm glad you kind of went there, in terms of, do we lean into the populist rhetoric? Because there are individuals like Mom Dami, like James Tallarico, who do really appeal to that rhetoric of trying to help the people, put more money in your pockets, create better job opportunities for you, and of course, go after the elite because they're screwing you over. And I do think the wealth inequality gap is a problem in America. Mm-hmm. However, I also think that populist rhetoric can be co-opted in very nefarious ways. So when it comes down to it, should the Democrats start leaning into it? That's the question.
I think there's no choice. In other words, it's not my preference. I'm not a populist by heart. In some ways, I'm a pragmatist at heart. I want people to do useful things. And I can explain why it was useful for Joe Biden to do things one way, or for Barack Obama to maybe compromise on what some people thought that he was going to do, at least in the vision for a lot of the ideologues. But at the end of the day, I don't get to decide what is the rhetoric that's appealing to voters and what will win elections and what will create mandates. And so given that, I'm a realist, I'm a materialist before I'm committed to, signaling in terms of technocratic, more policy-oriented discussions. Those just aren't landing. They don't land for the average person. They don't care about it, right? Like, most people will learn about these issues in the minutes before they're going to the voter booth, or at least a lot of them will learn about specifics of, like, I'm just now not talking about the top of the ticket, but like, let's say a ballot initiative. A lot of people are reading up on it, like, on their way, if they read up on it at all, to the voter booth. So we're dealing with a very different set of actors. And there, I'm kind of an information taker. It just feels like we're in a populist moment in this country. And that what's useful about that is twofold. One, populist rhetoric doesn't necessarily pick a particular kind of policy. It doesn't marry you to any corrosive form of government or authoritarianism, even though there's certainly a lot of populist authoritarians. It's not an entailment. It's not required to use populist rhetoric and then thereby adopt something that's really, really bad. But that makes picking a candidate for competency and for personality and for good traits about that person extra important, because as you stated, there is that risk, the risk of targeting particular minorities or doing something really, really stupid economically. So all of that danger is there. But the question of whether we should use the populist rhetoric, it's not even a question. We just need to. We need to win.
And I'm starting to lean into that idea that we need to, but there needs to be also very clear distinguishing lines of where we should or where we should not go. And this is probably what is the most important conversation for all the kind of stuff you've been into recently, in terms of, like, who is in the coalition, who are in within these boundaries that we are creating to ensure that we are not going to be co-opted in a way that is ruining the country. I mean, there's no doubt about that populist rhetoric appeals to the people. And there's no doubt that a lot of the people, for right or wrong, of course, there's a lot of like misinformation regarding COVID and people's feelings that it was the institutions that was the problem other than the pandemic itself. But even before that, you could even argue that people
Yes.
weren't truly feeling like their lives were getting better from the government and the institutions put in place. And that's a very important broad conversation. I do think it's very wide encompassing with like education needs to be better, with how people stop caring about local governments, even though they impact you much more directly and much more quickly than the federal government, and the power that is getting centralized more and more in the federal government, and even more so in the presidency and the executive branch. Like, it is a wide encompassing conversation,
Oh yeah.
no doubt.
It's not
For
just
sure.
COVID. You're right about that. And like the Great Recession is a wonderful example of that. That this kind of building resentment, which has been simmering, growing out of the promises of the '90s, where there was good economic times and a promise of a peace dividend after the fall of communism. That these feelings in post 9/11 and the wars, and then the Great Recession, that there's been this simmering resentment that you can feel, and Obama did what he could, I think, and actually won in many ways on a populist messaging, like change we can believe in, hope. This was a kind of dreamist rhetoric, highfalutin rhetoric, and governed, I think, as an honorable Democrat. But that it didn't put to bed the simmering tensions, and then new tensions, racial tensions, dissatisfaction within the Republican Party. So you're absolutely right. That this is a broader problem than just COVID, and it does seem to infect other parts of our public life.
And now, with a very clear example of populism being co-opted, and with like the MAGA movement utilizing that to get Donald Trump elected, even though all of that were lies, and individuals who paid attention to what he was saying was very understood all the lies and then the actual intent going on. It was very clear for people who are in the space, but for the average person, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Donald Trump did provide that factor that we mentioned earlier, relatability, and seemingly not a part of the establishment, which again, not true, very clearly a part of the elite class. But ultimately, this guy was able to co-opt it, and then now we're seeing a movement that is very fascist and authoritarian in our current regime. So transitioning that to Democrats, there's very clear what we got to do, very clear what the messaging should be. However, it's not so clear on who to work with, who are the risk factors, and potentially not diving yourself into places of, may not go fascist authoritarian, but maybe it goes socialist, communist authoritarian, and that is just as problematic. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no. So first, a very important thing to segment out is the discussion about rhetoric and the discussion about all the pitfalls, real pitfalls that you're mentioning, the ones that need to be grappled with and discussed. So on the issue of the discourse, real quick, this comparison might offend people. I promise you, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist. I don't know if it'll offend you, but it just is a fact that in the post-Tsarist Russia, when there was a lot of fighting for control over who was going to take over the country, everyone from reactionaries to Soviets spoke in terms of revolution. Okay, and it could actually be difficult, right, to segment out the different groups, the liberals from the communists, if you weren't familiar with inside baseball, because everyone spoke in terms of proletariat and revolutions and that kind of thing. A similar kind of feeling with the progressive era in the turn of the 20th century, where you had Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican, really usher in a lot of progressive reforms. And then you had, a reaction, a Wilsonian reaction that was also couched in terms of progressivism. And that was just the moment of the time. And that is independent, right, of necessarily political party or even ideology at times. The rhetoric that is offered by people doesn't necessarily match on a particular worldview. If you sell things as the Epstein class, if you sell things as, it's the billionaires going after you, it's these people, whatever, like you could map onto that a great many deal of political theories and solutions. I just want to say you could resolve all of these pitfalls in disparate ways and still have agreement on the rhetoric aspect of it and just be like very thoughtful about the rhetoric. And in fact, there are centrist-y type Democrats who are taking more of that route. No doubt, Ossoff voted for the Lincoln Riley Act. He's a more pragmatic, centrist Democrat, and yet he's using the language of populism. So there's nothing incompatible about that. Okay, that's the rhetoric. In terms of the pitfalls, absolutely, there are pitfalls in terms of who do you want to lead, who do you want to run as candidates, what kind of promises you want to make, what kind of policies you want to have. All of these contain potential pitfalls, adversaries, fifth columns, people that you don't want to trust, people that you do want to trust. And the devil is in the details. The devil is in the details. I 100% would not support the communist agenda or communists being in charge of the DNC. This is not something that I would like to see. And likewise, I probably wouldn't support someone like a Bill Clinton type person who I don't trust. Right? I don't trust Bill Clinton in terms of his personal standing. I didn't really think that his presidency was that much to laud over. I wouldn't trust him in the reins of power because I don't trust him as a person. And so these different issues of ideology, of personal trust, of people's characteristics, all of those rear their heads. It just depends which context you're talking about, Radell, and that will, I think, determine what my answer is. But we can get more narrow.
Yeah, so I do think it's at the very least, I believe we both would agree to this, that the Democratic Party, at the very least, has allowed the opportunity for, if you are capable to get elected, we will allow you into the coalition regarding the Democrat politicians. Because, Mom Dami, definitely very much to the left. Talarico, a Christian Democrat, which is a very unique. Even someone like, with all the controversy around him, Graham Plattner, with all the stuff regarding the Nazis and whatever.
He's got some endorsements. He's not outright being shunned. I guess what you're saying is, yes, the Democrat is a big tent center-left party that has a great degree of tolerance over differences of view in general. Is that a fair recap of what you're saying?
Yeah, that is a very fair recap. So understanding that, is that also a detriment? So once we kind of establish like whether or not they are properly focusing on certain individuals and adhering to them properly, and then the other aspect of it is the people and the people that could potentially influence politics, which I do think a lot of them can, media personalities, social media personalities, and just individuals that are just voters who think that their voice matters than everybody else. There is that interesting question. That's why you brought up the two aspects of like, what are we talking about? So if we kind of agree that the Democrats already do this, so to speak, if you're electable for the most part, we'll bring you into the coalition.
If you have value, yeah. And value can be in terms of winning difficult elections. It could be in terms of winning primaries reliably. It could be in terms of fundraising. And for a lot of Democrats, it's being able to raise money to donate to, Schumer. I don't like Schumer. I don't think he should be the leader anymore. Although I respect what he's done in the past, he at least has been successful at recruiting competitive candidates. For example, Sherrod Brown in Ohio. And, you might not agree with Janet Mills, but there have been other times where Schumer has been effective at being able to get people to step up to the plate who are competitive and more. So usefulness to the party is, it can be varied in different aspects. But yeah, in general, I think the Democrats operate, when they do operate collectively or together, more or less rationally, or they try to. What happens is that sometimes they're not talking to each other, and there's no unified head of the party all the time to make decisions. But the sort of practicality of the Democrats is shown best in terms of getting Joe Biden to step down. When the Democrats do put their heads together, they can be ruthless and they can use their influence to achieve outcomes. But I think oftentimes we think of the Democrats too collectively. I mean, it's a set of different actors who are loosely affiliated in terms of outcomes they want, but at times not much more than that.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think oftentimes that Democrats get put in this monolith like the MAGA movement very clearly is, and it's just not true. And when it comes down to a lot of the Democrats, they are very much focused on adhering to their constituents, which, fair enough. They're the people who voted you in and abiding by the principles that you outlined in your campaign. Of course, there are bad Democrats, and people need to realize, yes, there are bad Democrats. There are corrupt Democrats, Eric Adams, for example. And then there are people who are very clearly just focused on like their people, but their people are so close to the center that it really antagonistic to the Democratic platform as a whole. But these are individuals and they do not represent the totality of the DNC, which is gets conflated way too often. So the question here though
Mm-hmm.
is is that good? Should they make more clear boundaries as a movement, as a party, to ensure that they're more hyper focused on a specific direction of what America should be? Is that also the problem with the DNC in terms of people not really knowing whether or not what the DNC represents? I'm sure you've seen polling where there are some people who think the DNC is too center. There's a lot of people also think the DNC is way too left. It's not very clear because there's so many different personalities, so many different individuals a part of the platform itself.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm going to be so annoying and say it depends. And let me give you a couple of answers. When it comes to what the voting base, what the Democrat members, when I say that in this context, I'm talking about the rank and file Democrats who were registered Democrats should do. I think that they should impose stricter and harder lines, ideological lines on their candidates. I think that's proper, and that they should, in other words, close somewhat the system of ideology and thoughts in terms of what they get from their candidates. So with the DNC, different sets of answers. In general, I think the DNC should be more open and neutral in terms of the successful operations of the Democratic Party, with fewer kind of restrictive lines. When it comes to the president, like a Democratic leader or a leader in Congress, I think once again there should be more thought placed in terms of restricting what it means to or like policy agenda and having more compliance really from Democrats. I think the Democrats, as much as Republicans will try to paint them as all unified all the time, it's not always that case. And it really, I think, hurts the brand when we can't keep our coalition together on some issues where I don't think there should be much disagreement. And so the answer changes depending on which is the denominator that we're talking about. When it comes to the people, yes. So for example, one line that I would stress to Democratic voters is for you in a primary context, not in the general context, to make a line filibuster reform. That should be a line for you. Whoever is promising filibuster reform and court reform and accountability for Trump, those for me are like clear lines where we should narrow out candidates who aren't being a part of that. But the problem is that sort of rule of restriction is limited to the context of a primary. It's limited as an admonition to voters. But I wouldn't ever be like, oh, okay, it's a line in the sand to be in favor of filibuster reform, so don't vote for this Democrat in, I don't know, Arkansas or in Iowa who says absolutely hell no on filibuster reform paired against the MAGA Republican. And so any kind of restrictive rule has to come into contact with the fact that we live in a two-party first the past the post system. And those systems necessarily, if we don't want to lose election after election, need to have significant amounts of flexibility and tolerance in the sort of general scheme of the election, the general election. And you can have the discretion in other areas, in areas of policy discussion, in areas of the primary, and in areas of the White House.
Yeah, and it is a fine line. Of course, it's very contextual. I very much agree. And sometimes when I look at, okay, who are you endorsing as the DNC? Because we know like certain individuals endorse certain people. And are we still, even though it's a primary and we're deciding which Democrat is the best for a specific election for a specific district or whatever, are we still on the same page? We're still Democrats. We still want the Democratic vision, regardless of one person doing it better than the other. And sometimes it does seem when it comes down to the people, they think, no, they are not on our side. They're antagonistic to it. And when it comes down to the politicians, because I've spoke to a lot, I spoke to a couple, especially in this midterms, because I live in Ohio,
Hmm. Oh
and
yeah.
I've been doing more local politics in the last couple of months. And fortunately, because I've been doing that, I've been able to speak with a lot of like politicians that are running for different elections, and progressives and independents and a lot of different people. And for the most part, we all agree Republicans should lose every single race. So when it comes down to it, I had a conversation with these guys, and once they started entering to the system, because there are some very notable progressive ones that are really rising in popularity and pushing very progressive messaging, like a guy that I really like speaking to named Jared Christian. And one thing that I wanted to establish really quickly is, do you understand why the gerrymandering stuff happened regarding Ohio? And he said, at first I was mad, but once I learned and like the context of it, and learned that, the Democrats were in a losing battle, so they had to do whatever it can to like, minimize the loss. That understanding and being able to humanize that the Democrats in there are not nefarious just because they do certain things. They're
Hmm.
doing the best they can in a particular situation. And a lot of these politicians very quickly realize, I mean, Obama and Bernie Sanders also talk about, we got to work together. We're not as bad. We got to be on the same page. So it seems like they get it, but the people don't. So now
Yeah, yeah.
it's time to transition to like the people, and why do you believe there's that discrepancy between the two factors?
So this is between sort of the desire, the good faith belief that we're all in it for the same goal, and I guess help me out the distinction that you're trying to draw at. I understand what you just said there, where it's like once it was explained to these Democrats what was going on with the gerrymandering, it seemed like they understood the goal and we shared the goal. And the question was, is this action in furtherance of the goal? Will it help achieve the goal? And so that's where the disagreement comes in. But we're basically, quote, on the same team. I understood what you just said there. Help me understand this kind of like distinction that you're trying to draw out.
Well, you referred to it just earlier too, that there are people,
Oh,
which I agree with, that don't see us on the same side. I mean, you brought up the astute example, which I also agree with like the primary. Oh, he's my guy. General. Well, he didn't do what I like, so I'm still not voting for him. I'm like, bro, he's still a Democrat. What are we not
oh,
getting
okay.
here?
I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. So for me, the these questions, the lines need to be kept in their particular context, and they don't make sense out of them. And the problem, I think, is reasonable minds can disagree on what those lines should be in a given context. When you talk about a shared goal, I think the only thing for me, which is a unifying shared goal, which is like almost essential to what it is to be a Democrat, is to be opposed to Trump and wanting to elect Democrats. Now, a lot of that is like self-ID, self-referential. In a way, it's circular. But that really is, and maybe it's unfortunate to the movement, the connective tissue right now is characterized, and ought to be characterized, at least in some respect, by opposition to the current controlling party and prolonged existence of the party itself. It's very basic in that sense. It's trying to make itself survive longer by putting itself into power and into office. So to the extent that we're talking about a shared goal, that has to be it. The goal has to be to oust Trump and to put Democrats into power. I think a lot of people, however, don't have that as like the higher tier goal. Some people have as a higher tier goal foreign policy issues or specific regulatory reform. Think about in the context of farmers. Maybe there's something that you could bribe farmers with, that they care about that thing more than they care about ousting Trump. Certainly when it came to like Elon Musk and all these old tech people, they cared more about like woke stuff and culture and maybe regulatory issues in their specific spaces, crypto, AI, whatever, than they did about Democrats winning or Republicans losing. I know the example that's cited a lot for lefties vis-a-vis Democrats, they care more about the policy related, or at least they claim to care more about the policy related to Israel, Palestine, and foreign intervention than they do about getting Democrats elected. And so depending on what your higher order goal is, you can assess whether or not you share it with a particular individual.
Yeah, and at a human level, I do get that to an extent. People do have their fine lines, but in general, that principle I'm okay with. I mean, for the most part, even though I'm very clearly MAGA bad, I am not interested in political titles personally, political identities personally. I just believe in what I believe in, issue by issue by issue, and I can articulate every single one. That's just how I approach it, which is why I'm able to engage with different people as long as they're sane. Um, with that said, though, when it comes to this current situation, it dawns on me that there is still a group of people that do not understand the dire situation we're in, because specifically, as you mentioned, Trump and what his movement is doing to the institutions that it put in place and to America as a whole. And I feel like when it comes down to why, it could be ignorance, or it could be, well, they don't like America anyway. So just because he's destroying or deteriorating the institutions, that actually doesn't bother them because their vision goes beyond what America is currently. Do you find similar rationale when you come across individuals that seem
Yeah, so like
like they have ulterior motives regarding being a part of the Democrats and being a part of the left?
we're talking about like the Hassan types, right? The some might say like the dead ender lefties or the far lefties. Yeah. So um I think that what's explained in terms of their um sort of reticence to selected or to either enthusiastically or at all endorse Democrats, stand Democrats, all that stuff, is more explained either by a dogmatic view of certain policy issues that will, cause them to think that voting for anyone who isn't some level of threshold on those views is bad in and of itself, regardless of if they're better than the other candidate in the particular area, right? So there's a kind of I don't truly understand it, but almost like a categorical imperative view or a deontological view, some might say, of voting itself vis-a-vis some threshold on a policy issue, even if materially it's better off for whatever pet issue it is for you to, whether it's Israel, etc., for you to pick the candidate if they don't reach that sufficient threshold. Some might say it's like making the perfect the enemy of the good. So there's that view, which I think is honestly held by a lot of people. And then for other people, I think it's self-interest. I honestly think that a lot of these people have found niches for themselves, and they either want to further their own power, further their own influence, or further their own money, or further their own clout. And, in isolation, you might say, well, having those motivations isn't necessarily wrong. Like, I certainly want more clout. I want more money. I want more influence. What we have a problem with, though, is when those interests are being served at the expense of what we think is a rational trade-off in a sort of a binary context. They'll just reject that binary, and instead they'll put either this dogmatic view on perfection or this self-interest above what I think are the interests even of their own selected pet issues and indeed the country.
I'll say for me, when it comes down to dealing with these type of individuals, I'm not inherently a very emotional person, but I very clearly and understandably try to sympathize with people who focus on morality and more humanitarian philosophies and appealing to people as they are and appealing to the sanctity and of people in general. So I do understand when people have these draw lines because they feel so passionately about something like the Israel.
Can I give you an example? Sorry to interrupt you, but I had a conversation with a man named Prime Kai. I always enjoyed talking to Prime, and he was actually the reason why I started doing these Twitch streams is because during COVID in law school, I saw his stream and it was like an open panel, and I just joined one day. So props to him. It's someone who personally I like, but I gave him a hypothetical in a conversation. I said, if you knew to a certainty that your vote for Kamala individually would have saved 20,000 lives of Palestinians, of Gazans, would you vote for Kamala? He said no to that question. So you could say this person hates Palestinians. You could say this person is clearly lying if that's your view. Or you could take the view that this person's values are just off and they just are not they have this deontological or threshold perfectionist view, or they're self-interested. But I can tell you a lot of these people are honest about their belief here, that they certainly will not vote for anyone who, quote, doesn't deserve their vote, even if you could show a direct connection to lives saved. I don't particularly understand that view, but it does exist.
It does exist. And those are definitely not the people that I'm referring to. The reason why the distinction on like focusing on people that have a clear moral imperative is I do think they can be convinced. And I do think that is the biggest conversation that doesn't necessarily only appeal to people on the left, but also appeals to people in the center. I don't know how much on the right nowadays, but maybe some people on the right as well, that they can be convinced if you are able to maybe fix your rhetoric, or at the very least make it understandable that the moral imperative needs to be directed in a better direction. And there is something to that. And also it kind of humanizes the voters as more than just a statistic, which I do think oftentimes is very necessary when we engage in these conversations.
Sure.
However, I also think that it's also very important to draw that distinguishing line of the bad actors. And the bad actors that do not have the best interests of America, by extension, the people that live in America, should be treated as such, as a bad actor, treated as an enemy, and treated as someone that it does not have your best interest, the person who has the moral imperative, in mind when they do whatever dilly-dally that they do. So my thing is, I just treat these guys as my enemy, unfortunately, but it is the truth, because I don't think they have good intentions for the country and for the people. Do you hold the same principle, or do you think that you can still like work with these so-called bad actors?
I'm sorry. Yeah, like I think it does just require further clarification. I treat an enemy as an enemy by definition, because if I identify someone as an enemy, I'm going to treat them the way I would treat an enemy. But the truth is, I would treat enemies differently depending on how they're situated. For example, in terms of, enemies with respect to something, right? Someone is an enemy with you with respect to a goal, or to respect with some sort of value that one has, right? If I am in a race, my opponent is my enemy in the sense that we are trying to achieve two different aims, and our aims are kind of like mutually incompatible. If I win, he loses. If he wins, I lose. And so an enemy has a goal in mind, it has a direction, there's a normativity implied there. And so I think enemy with respect to something. And so enemy with respect to our goal of X, Y, or Z, I will absolutely acknowledge that certain people are enemies, right? And now this is also not just an on-off switch, right? There's degrees of this as well, which I think everyone would recognize. But someone I would consider to be an enemy so far as the direction of our country and who we need to elect into power would be someone like Tim Pool, all right? Tim Pool is promoting bullshit. He is directly supportive of the MAGA agenda in many respects. He supports, the rendition of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He was okay with what happened to Mahmoud Khalil. He's okay with Trump being corrupt as fuck. And he basically makes apologies for all this shit. Everyone kind of acknowledges that. I still go on Tim Pool. I'm polite to Tim Pool. I have debates with Tim Pool. So the question is, how would you treat an enemy? And which enemy would you treat one way versus the other? How much of an enemy are they? And with respect to which goal are they an enemy?
So I think for me, when it comes down to dealing with enemies, in reference to this conversation, the term enemy applies to the overall goal of the principles of American liberalism, and spreading it and propagating it and pushing it to a better society. Because of course, I think American liberalism is the best we have in the world currently. And by extension, it provides a lot of opportunity in so many different areas. And I just do think that there are just a lot of good things morally, socially, economically it can provide. So
if that's the base, I just want to say, then anyone who's against that system, I guess, by definition, analytically would be an enemy. You understand?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So when I hold that principle, I do look at that. I agree. Tim Pool would be my enemy. Other individuals would also be my enemy that you can imagine. Sam Piker, in my opinion, is my enemy. Donald Trump and the entire MAGA coalition, cult, whatever, a lot of them are my enemies. And I do also draw distinctions between like the people that are basically the cult leaders and a lot of the base. There are some people who just believe Trump no matter what. And there's some people who voted for Trump really being a little bit more ignorant or just believing in his lies. And I don't put them under the same umbrella. I think that's ridiculous. I think ignorance is a thing that is natural in our current system of misinformation and education that is flawed in helping people understand how politics and government works currently. So when it comes down to it, once I establish that this person is anti-liberal, anti-American, and just anti these principles that I do think can create a better society and therefore a better humanity, at that point, I want everybody to be very clear. Me, him, we aren't friends. Me, him, we're very antagonistic to each other. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't work in their bubble, you can't be around them, or every time you see them, it's on site. Let's box. Let's have a fist fight.
Can you be married to them?
Can you be married? No, I don't think you can be married to your enemy. I think that's ridiculous.
I don't. Or what about have a good relationship with a sibling or a friend of yours that is, yes, your political enemy in the context of the country, or maybe even in the context of liberalism and in the struggle of ideas and the clash of civilizations. But there are, again, I know this is so annoying for people, but there's different contexts in which these things, like there could be an all-purpose enemy, which is like, I would take, for example, let's say that China attacks us and invades with an army of its troops. You know, maybe we could consider those people like all-purpose enemies. You can't even justify their existence by breaking bread with the invader, right? But except for those cases where we're talking about like an all-purpose enemy, I'm not so sure that it's entailed that I treat them badly if I have even massive. Don't you have like a communist friend or a MAGA friend?
No, I don't. Now, this is a good thing to bring up because for me, I don't hide that I do politics. And I've already had two people that I knew back in my past life that were super angry at some things I was saying about Monsieur Trump. They're very upset. They're very angry. He's like, oh, you're biased, blah, 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 Trump, 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 Trump. And at this point, our relationship is pretty much cutthroat. It's not the same. Now, I do want to establish, I do believe in respect. I do believe a civil society requires you to deal and talk with people you do not like. I think that's necessary. I mean, a work environment is the perfect thing. I guarantee you're going to find someone that you work. It's like, oh, we're doing work. We are not friends. We'll never be friends, but we got a job to do here. So I think that is fair and that is fine. And I do think this is also resonates with aspects of like things that we do in terms of pushing political messaging. However, one thing that should be clear, even when we're pushing political messaging, even when we're being politically civil, one thing that should be clear is that we're also not on the same side. We're also not friends. If someone comes out of and believes in principles that I do think is dangerous, for example, just pushing things, let me just do the easy one, pushing things saying, hey, man, Black people don't deserve rights.
Yeah.
I don't care if we're family. I don't care if we're friends. We're no longer at that point because you don't believe in the same vision I believe, where I believe in human rights and believe everybody's equal. You don't believe in that. So we can never coalesce into a relationship that is fruitful moving forward. So I don't believe that actually works. And I also don't believe in the mindset that, oh, well, let's just not talk about politics. Let's not talk about religion. Let's just not talk about all this stuff. Now, religion, I'm agnostic. I just go like, I don't know what's real. I grew up Christian. So that's why I'm not antagonistic to like Christians or like religious people. But when it comes to politics and when it comes to these deeper philosophies in terms of like humans and what we should do, I don't think me censoring myself to make you feel better is a productive way or a meaningful relationship at the end of the day. So I just don't agree to that sentiment personally.
Yeah. So personally, there can certainly be lines that everyone has in terms of what will be compatible for a friendship, what will be compatible in terms of reputational risk, right? What will be compatible in terms of even religious values or broader moral values, right? There are some people who I probably couldn't be friends with because of their views on stuff. I don't doubt that those things exist as personal preferences. No doubt about that. However, I think that is something that says more about like, well, what am I okay with? What, in what respect am I incompatible? Do my preferences or my values or my goals not match up with having this kind of relationship? But I don't always think that it's impossible to, for example, have a MAGA friend that doesn't cause you internal strife and that doesn't sort of undermine your ultimate aim in society, at least to any material degree. At the end of the day, we have to breathe the same air of these people. And something like 49, what percentage of it was? It wasn't a majority, but it was near that of the country voted for Donald Trump in the recent election. These are people who we go, to the bank with, go to church with, people who ride the bus, who are all around us. And so I just think that maybe in your most cherished relationships, maybe in your interactions online, there should be harder lines for people who truly have odious beliefs. But I'll tell you right now, I'm friends with some Trump supporters or some ex-Trump supporters. And I don't think that it's always wrong to be civil with such people. I shook the people's hands that I go to these events with. And I know that you said respect is something different. But yeah, I really do think it depends on the context. And I know that's annoying to hear, but I don't always think that the right approach is to be, showing everyone this is my enemy.
I just want to be very clear in terms of my articulation
Yeah.
of what I mean here is that I do think it's very important that the values that you're attributing very specifically is thought through very carefully, because when it comes down to it, it is oftentimes there is a lot of like perspective that aligned with a specific viewpoint that doesn't necessarily apply to who they are as individuals. And this just can be something as easy as easy is the wrong word, but the concept would be easy of expanding their perspective, and the concept of talking to them and seeing if they can look at things from a different view of a point of view, empathize it, relate to the person dying here. I can relate and empathize with it because what if it was my kid? There are plenty of tactics that works with, which is why when I said earlier, there are plenty of people that voted for Trump for a variety of different reasons. However, I'm very particular who I'm referring to. If you voted for Trump because you want a ultra Christian white nationalist authoritarian regime, that you're fine with censoring elections, that you're fine with picking very specific individuals who can censor the media. If you're fine with, I'm sure you saw this clip. There's like these two parents who were telling their kids, "Oh yeah, I'm okay if you shoot some citizens."
Oh yeah, it was like the two parents and the two. Yeah, that was wild. Yeah,
that was a wild thing. At that point, I can very clearly articulate, you are not on my side. You do not abide by American liberal principles. You do not abide by a society where we treat each other equal and try to create a better society moving forward as humanity continues as long as it can. You have a very specific and different methodology that you're focused on something that is a lot more nefarious. So when I say these things, I don't want people to try to do the same type of framing and how they are thinking through things, but people who are capable of articulating their philosophy, ideology, and morality should also be able to understand how to apply these different circumstances on a case-by-case scenario. And I do think that is very important, especially if you're a person who's a political commentator, if you're a person that does all this time to really ensure that we are creating the best results for people, that you really have these things fine-tuned so you are not potentially normalizing bad actors around you.
Let me give you what you want. I think that the language of enemies, the language of categorization, and it comes to public debate on politics, makes a lot of sense. I use the term enemy. He's an enemy of the American people. He's an enemy of the Democrats. These are terms that and rhetoric and stuff that I use, and even concepts that I think are fine. If anything, just to have a distinction principle between sets of actors. And I have no problem if you're going to label someone who is fundamentally opposed to the liberal democratic order in this country, of labeling them as enemies of your political goals. And certainly if their goal is to institute, an authoritarian state or a Marxist-Leninist state, it's incompatible with a view on the American Republic that we share. And so in that sense, they're an enemy. In some other sense, though, they may not be an enemy. And that's the question of the day is, to what extent is it useful for you or for anybody to not treat them the exact way you would treat MAGA, and to have a distinction between the dead enders and the MAGA people. Now, in some cases, it might be a total waste of your time and just like so stupid to even think about it. In other cases, it may be wise, prudent to do these kinds of other interactions or to treat differently such individuals from MAGA people. I think it really, really does depend. And I can tell you, right, like I consider people like the Cheney family, I consider Joe Manchin, in many respects, in different contexts, villains, right? In the context of the Bush administration, Cheney was a villain, including his daughter, Liz Cheney, who was at least involved there and also later on had her own career. In the context of the fight for Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, Joe Manchin was an enemy there. And ultimately, he didn't vote for Kamala and he didn't endorse Kamala in 2024. And so in the context of that election, he was an enemy. But I can see usefulness of using Joe Manchin. I can see usefulness of using Liz Cheney either after they've changed or after there's another set of situations that make an alliance or at least some other interaction other than all or nothing prudent. That's all I'm saying.
And I definitely hear that. And it is contextual. And there's something interesting here where we could take the next conversation in terms of individuals who are not completely aligned with like what you're thinking, but at the very least you hope that they can either be turned or at the very least they can be worked with. There can be cooperation. We are a country that was built on cooperation, collaboration, and that's a very important thing to remember. So when we have situations where we have individuals, and this kind of relates back to you, in terms of like some conversations you've had, there are individuals that I'm like, a Tucker Carlson, he's my enemy. And I use that in a very clear term. I don't think we want the same thing.
Agreed.
Hassan Piker.
You're speaking politically in terms of political goals.
Political goals, I just think that individual and in all our aspects of morality, our opinions on society, politically, like everything you could think of, I think you want something very different.
Yeah, so there's a broader sense of enemy that's being used here, which I'm not always going to sign off on, right? Like, so Tucker Carlson is your general enemy. Like if this person were, if you were forced to work with this person as some kind of project, let's say for your employment, you might want to work with him on that. If there were some discrete issue, and I hate Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker Carlson is odious. I think Tucker Carlson is a liar. I think he's a really, really bad person. I think he's knowing and intentional and malicious about his statements. And I think that he is a really, really bad force for America. But I just like, you are using a sense of enemy that is broader. It is encompassing not just, your overall political goals, your immediate political goals, but like in every sense you're opposed to him.
I would say in more so in terms of the general perception of like society and how it should be run. That is the best thing. I can't say every sense because he might agree that he's a Los Angeles Lakers fan, and then I'm like, fuck, I'm screwed.
Or what about in the war? In the war, if he were a vote in Congress against the war, assuming you're against it, I'm against the war. I think that this should be one of those lines in the Democratic primary context that voters should impose on their candidates and the primary. But yeah, you would work with Tucker Carlson to achieve the end of the war or to achieve the end of punishing corruption. Of course you would. And it reminds me. Go for it.
A little. It really depends on what you mean with work with, and I don't want to go into the Jordan Peterson thing, but I think I understand what you mean in terms of like we're voting the same direction, which I hear you, but at the same time, there's also like we're going the same direction, but I still hate your guts. Yeah. And I think that making that distinction is very important. And the reason why I brought up Tucker Carlson and being like an enemy, which I do believe, and like an Hassan Piker, I do also believe is an enemy of mine. I also want to be very clear. I want to say this again. I do believe in um, civil discourse and a civil society requiring you to work with people you hate and your enemies in general. I do believe in that aspect, but perception is reality. One, and two, it's very important to note that these distinctions, when it comes down to what they represent, should never, at any point, be attached to who you are as an individual, and that association can be very problematic. With that said, though, I do think something that is a little bit harder to figure out, which is probably the crux of all the beefs you've been having, is the 1 degree of separation from the bad actor. So in this instance, I'll give you 2 examples.
Mhm.
Tucker Carlson, bad. When I heard PF Jung say that he would pick Tucker Carlson as the candidate for the Republican Party, I was like, what the fuck are we doing? That is actually crazy. And then another example would be like Sam Piker, bad. But if you are doing the fucking what's the progressive something?
Progressive Victory?
Progressive Victory, and then you're on the same panel. Okay, there's a 1 degree of separation when you're clearly not a Sam Piker and you clearly don't believe in the things he believes in. However, there's a level of association. So when we kind of get into those individuals where it's like they're not bad actors, I can pretty much determine that, but their belief or belief / association, because there's very distinct differences between the 2 examples I gave you. Okay, in your opinion, what do you think is the best way to deal with these?
What I'm trying to do is not to recreate this purity testing Prime Kai example on Gaza the other way around. Let me explain that, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, my opposition to Hassan Piker is just like my opposition to any other set of Democratic actors, is contingent, not just on who Hassan Piker is, but it's contingent on what I expect the results would be. And the way I can show this and demonstrate this is to give a hypothetical, an example. Forget about 1 degree of separation. If you knew that Kamala Harris taking the stage and accepting Hassan Piker's endorsement would cause her to win the election, would you encourage her to do it?
Drawing a very clear, distinct line is what you're offering right now to see what side they're on.
It's a simplified hypothetical for the purpose of demonstrating the point. It's not realistic as a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. It's just a set of circumstances, like the one I presented to Prime when I said, if your vote would have saved 20,000 lives, just your one vote, would you do it? And he said no. And so the question becomes like, well, okay, if Kamala Harris, the only thing I'm saying is taking the stage with Hassan Piker to accept the nomination. Not that it would affect her policies, not anything else, but you just know for a certainty in the hypothetical world that it would cause her to win the election. Would you encourage her to do it?
I will say, I do think this is a very appropriate strategy. I do think there's a lot of validity on what it can provide and articulate what their positions may align with overall in terms of the line we're drawing. However, the thing that I also think about is convincibility. And I do think that is a very important part of the conversation in terms of like, can I still get them on my side? Like,
I know, but you're fighting the hypo. No, I agree. It's very unrealistic. And this kind of thing isn't going to work to win over whole elections and stuff. If it works at all, it'll be on the margin. And maybe it might even hurt you, right? Her taking the stage might even hurt you among centrists or whatever with Hassan Piker. I'm just talking about the hypothetical in which you know as a given at the hypothetical that it would cause Kamala to win the election. And I think the answer there is yes. You would encourage Kamala Harris to take the stage and embrace Hassan Piker as part of this election if you knew it would defeat Trump in 2024. I think you have to grant me that, right?
Oh, so you were asking me the hypothetical?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were still referring to
no.
In terms of... Okay, ask your question again. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If you knew for certain that having Kamala Harris go on stage to embrace Hassan Piker and accept his endorsement of her, that it would cause her to win the election in 2024, would you encourage her to do it?
Oh, for sure. I definitely would encourage her to do it. Of course, there's context of like how you would
exactly.
approach it. But,
So all I'm trying to demonstrate there isn't that it was a smart idea to do. The purpose of the hypothetical is to show that how one interacts with Hassan Piker is going to be contingent on what we think is likely to occur with Hassan Piker. In the abstract, I'm happy to admit that Hassan Piker is an enemy to my long-term political goals because he envisions, as I understand his views, at least with respect to the fundamental relationship between state and person, a much more illiberal society than me. I have no doubt about that, but that's not the question. That's not an interesting question to me, in other words. It's almost by definition, according to the terms we've laid out, of enemy and of political goals here. That just follows almost like by definition, it follows. The question is like, when is it appropriate and how is it appropriate to make the distinction between Hassan Piker and lefties like him or any other group, let's call them even Fettermans, and MAGA? That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah, I do think that's very interesting too. And to kind of go back into the crux of the conversation, one thing that we would for sure do is establish that Kamala Harris would need to have the understanding of who the individual is and create a very distinct line that you're not attached to all his crazy anti-American socialist ideologies, potentially just with the association. And that's also a very important thing that when it comes down to the conversations, which I kind of bring it back, perceptions, reality, as well as the attachment of principles and positions that we have to constantly pay attention to. It's annoying, but it's the truth. And one thing that we probably agree on is I don't believe in complete dissociation depending on the scenario, because yes, there are individuals where I'm like, you're KKK, and you're a nobody. I don't need to associate with you. No value in my life is being friends with you, associating with you, unless you're working at Taco Bell so I can get my taco. Other than that, I don't need to associate with you. However, the reason why this conversation is important in the current landscape is that there are very clearly actors in the space that have impact.
Yes.
And it annoys me when some people go like, oh, he's just social media. No, he influences way too many people.
Yeah, it's like this Heisenberg or whatever the box is, Schrodinger's influencer. You know, they obviously need to interact with the influencer because the influencer is so big or so important, or it was so bad they didn't endorse, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because it wouldn't have changed anything. So yes, I find it very frustrating for people who downplay the influencer class. I think that there is some significance, and more people are turning away from traditional news sources. So I agree with you on that. Yeah.
And people make these one-to-one fallacies all the time where it's like, oh, he's not as big as Joe Rogan. He doesn't have to be. Regardless, when it comes down to voters, they're the ones that matter. And if we start reaching thousands to millions, then that is a large base that can be convinced. And of course, the transit property of spreading a message of potentially bad rhetoric, as we've seen for another individual where people thought, well, he's just an individual, he'll die out. Unfortunately, he did not, Nick Fuentes. So, and then he started to aspire a lot of these white, lonely teenage boys, young adults, into thinking some bullshit constantly. So you can't ignore them. The thing is, you're going to have to make it very clear you don't associate with their principles, but you also can attack their principles. You can also utilize their platform for a better means, because I also agree to the aspect that there are individuals that are maybe flawed perspective, ignorant, that can be convinced. And that's the biggest part of the equation. Fortunately for Trump, when it comes to Joe Rogan, he sucks at interviewing. So you could say whatever the fuck you want on his podcast, and then you can just co-opt a lot of his base. So that is a very important thing that I do believe we agree to. I guess there's
a lot of interesting things that you just said there, and I do want to state that I'm not suggesting that you're like this, never ever interact with X person. I think that you're probably a pragmatist at heart as well. And I acknowledge also there's a long-term utility that you need to take into consideration too, which is like, well, maybe if I gave you that hypothetical about Kamala Harris and embracing, it would win that election. But in the long term, like the socialists would gain influence and would deteriorate in 50 years. Not now, right? Right now we save our republic, but we just have a good basis to believe in 50 years, the communists will take over. And so to prevent the greater harm, unfortunately, we're going to have to roll the dice on the election this time around. So I'm also sensitive to, in other words, I'm sensitive to the fact that practicalities don't exist just in the moment, that they can exist in a longer term situation, and that reputational risk can sort of go past certain epochs and can carry forward, And that influence that you think are little or might go away if you just ignore them might come back and bite you in the ass, or might stick around and have some kind of staying power. So those are all things I agree with, and I think things that you acknowledge too. What I'll add though is you wouldn't be in favor of like killing Hassan Piker over his views, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, you don't think that he should like be silenced by the government. You don't think that you think that it's okay, assuming that the rules are applied evenly, which they're not always, right, on these platforms. You think Hassan should be like allowed to stream, right?
Oh, for sure, he should be allowed to stream. Now, the question is, do I want him to never?
Yeah, you don't want him to stream because you want him to fade into irrelevance, right, because of his views. So the question for me is just like, what is the least bad option in terms of interactions with Hassan or the left, given that we're not going to kill him and we're not going to silence him? And we think that, like, what do we have the power to do that would lead to the worst bad outcome? And that's, I think, the question as distilled as it can get. And I'll let you know my priors. My priors are that I think differently about people who voted for Trump versus those who sat out the election. I view differently those who sat out the election versus those who quietly voted for Kamala. And I treat these people differently. And I treat people who once voted for Trump who acknowledge it was wrong differently than people who continue to vote for Trump. And so those are kind of my priors in terms of how I treat people, but make the case for me in terms of these lefties, which I think is what everyone is trying to talk about. Certainly that's the discourse on CNN.
So when it comes down to the lefties, it is a difficult matter when kind of dealing with them. I do get frustrated consistently, as we've seen a lot of people get frustrated, that they are trying to push messaging that is very harmful to Democrats, and by extension, potentially giving more credence and power to the right, which of course is bad for not only society, but more specifically you. And there's also kind of a weird detachment on not realizing that in terms of your influencing, in terms of changing things from a more leftist point of view, your best chance of that is a Democrat in charge. We've seen people like Joe Biden move to the left in so many positions. And even though a lot of people on the left hate him, Gavin Newsom also moved very left in a lot of positions as well. So when it comes down to this situation, there's a weird kind of detachment of like what is actually going on, who's really the threat, who's really the harm. And for me, I do think it is very important for individuals to associate with these individuals, but make sure to either recontextualize how things really are, maybe expand their perspective, which can be valuable. Sometimes it just takes growing up a little bit, because oftentimes these are young individuals that don't really know anything. But there needs to be, and I think there's something very interesting with, you brought up CNN, but I think like Democratic news sources in general, that Hassan Piker has been put on the pedestal. You know what happened as a result? People are start realizing who he is, and they're start bringing back those past clips. They're starting bringing back those past tweets, and there's a very quick realization that, oh, this guy might not be on our side.
Is that your impression? Because my impression is that he's bigger than he's ever been, and that this stuff can oftentimes have the reverse impact. I will say that I disagree with some lefties who say there's no use in these kinds of internal conversations. I actually think in many ways they are useful. I find them boring and repetitive, and I think there's probably too many of them. And so I get frustrated by how often they're occurring and the way that they're being conducted. But holding up adherence to the Democratic Party and voting for Democratic Party, and whether or not someone supported a Democratic candidate as a kind of tacit and implicit positive in the context of these conversations, I think is a useful framing. It's like, oh, no, look, his audience is amenable to Kamala, and see, he never endorsed Trump. Or the same thing with like Kyle Kalinske, even feeling the pressure and the need to be like, well, no, I endorsed the Green Party candidate before Joe Biden dropped out, and it was after where I made it clear that I would that Kamala would be preferable, et cetera, et cetera. Even the feeling that a lot of the pressure that a lot of more left-wing people are having to face to show that they're actually not that harmful in the context of electoral strategy, I think is a positive for at least some of these conversations occurring. That said, I'm not convinced that the way that they're occurring is either having the desired effect of diminishing the influence of these people, or indeed having the effect of like convincing their audience or anything like that. So I'm not sure why we would say it's a successful strategy, at least now. Maybe you could say in the long term, this kind of ostracization that's being pushed would be successful. But I'm just not seeing evidence. You brought up Nick Fuentes. Isn't that a great example against, and this kind of sort of deliberate strategy?
It really depends on what you're trying to appeal to. Nick Fuentes, and I bring this up all the time. Nick Fuentes appealed to a subsection of people that the majority of America, the white male, especially young ones, and there's no doubt about it. And I've already said this before in the past, like, bro, sometimes we gotta chill with like some of the wokey stuff we did in the late 2010s and early 2000s and 2020s, that really ostracized a lot of them. And of course, they pushed them to the Republicans. So there was like a large section of people that felt like they need to find something. I mean, and I hate all these movements, but they knew the audience that they were going after. I hated the red pill. I hate the Groyper stuff.
Mhm.
And when it comes down to it, these like movements appeal to what it means to be a man. Hey, it's okay to be white. All this kind of bullshit jargon, in my opinion. But there's no doubt that there was a large subsection of people that existed in this fringe that was able to be co-opted.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to Hassan, I'm not as convinced that there's going to be that percentage that can be co-opted, but I do think bringing up that example is important because you need to consider the risk. And when it comes down to many of the decisions we make of the people we associate or disassociate with, it really, and you brought up a lot of it, it really depends on the risk factors.
Yes.
What is going to happen as a result of how we're dealing with these people? I think it probably would be less harmful for Fuentes. For me, I don't have a clear position, but I am feeling good that there are people that are pointing out some of the bullshit that Hassan Piker has said over the years that are very clearly anti-American and bad, of course, in so many different circumstances. And I do like that when Mom Dami was asked a question about Hassan Piker, he very clearly...
I don't agree with him. I think it's bad. I think it's a bad statement. Yeah, that was good.
Exactly.
And that shows, I think, that Democrats are able to make those kinds of distinctions and those kinds of disagreements and seem to be, in other words, there's no real seeming that like the Democrats are becoming some kind of like are monsters in response to even people who, collaborate closely with Hassan, even the most left-wing candidates for office in this country. And I think that there's an unspoken of potential benefit to dirty up certain influencers in the sense of getting them to take more ownership and stake in the Democratic agenda that needs to be weighed. I'm not saying that it overcomes the other kinds of risks, but that needs to be weighed in light of the potential of radicalization of members, when I don't think that there's a big appetite for the members themselves, here I'm talking about the candidates themselves, to be radicalized in the way that people are thinking of. And then finally, I would just add that, like, I think a lot of people are upset at a sunk cost to them. The sunk cost is that Hassan is influential at all, but that's already happened, and it's not going away. You can try all you want, but there's no surefire strategy to take away Hassan's influence. And so I think that a lot of the distress and angst and anger relates to the fact that it's totally out of our control in this moment. We have to deal with, like, well, how do we respond to someone with a lot of influence? What do we do? And I'm not sure that there's that is like that we have the power to stop him from being influential.
I will say potentially. It's hard to really say, but I do think at the very least there would be a stagnation. And of course, when it comes to a rising of influence and impact, there oftentimes is a decline as well. And my prescription on like Hassan's rise in popularity recently is the whole bullshit, which I also don't agree with, of we need a Joe Rogan of the left. And don't know this for certain, but my idea of like what happened here regarding a lot of the DNC association is that they just knew he had a lot of numbers attached to his name. They didn't really know about his positions, which is why a lot of it's coming out now. And they didn't really know like who this guy is. We just know that he had a lot of viewers, subscribers, clips, and all that stuff. And he's probably the biggest left-wing content creator, I would imagine, at the very least.
I think he is.
He probably is, yeah. So they attached themselves to him immediately to try to copy a flawed but effective a framework from what the people on the right did. And of course, we're seeing the backlash of all of that currently.
Are we? What's the cost? I don't understand the cost, because like Democrats regularly interact with people who I consider to have more odious views than Hassan Piker, namely like MAGA pieces of shit. Chris Murphy goes on Fox News. People go on Piers Morgan's show. Piers Morgan is a Trump dick suck. I mean, this is true also of Bill Maher. Bill Maher essentially supports this war. I'm sure, Sam Harris supports this war. I wouldn't like if a Democrat went on Sam Harris. And so like you can really run the gamut in terms of people's views here. But like, where's the large piece of evidence that the Democrats are being materially harmed by their encounters, which are often couched in qualifications, and that like, okay, we don't agree with everything that Hassan has said. Where's the evidence that it's actually been harmful or it's risky?
Well, I never said that it was harming them. I never said that exactly. And I do think there's also a distinguishable difference between like Hassan Piker in terms of trying to manipulate and influence policy versus like other entities that have a notoriety that like people know them, but whether or not they are changing or influencing anything is a big different question. Hassan has a very intentional purpose of trying to change things, whereas Piers Morgan is a talking head that has viewers, and Fox News just pushes right-wing propaganda.
You don't think they want to change stuff? I mean, Piers has views. He wants his views to be enacted. Bill Maher has views. These people have met with Trump. They also care about, their own perspectives and people listening to them and gaining followers. I'm not sure that it's not as deliberate.
No, I think you can have views, but I think you would agree. Like, there's a difference between having a view, having a position, and trying to instill and implement your views onto society.
There's a difference between implementing it and having it. I just think that they're on all fours with each other. It seems like both, like all of these people want their visions enacted. Maybe I guess Hassan interacts directly in terms of advocacy.Maybe that's and that would be some distinction. It wouldn't distinguish him from like the Joe Rogan types who we are encouraging Democrats to go on, right? We still are encouraging that, right?
Democrats going on Joe Rogan, yeah, for sure.
So like, what's the harm there, right? Like Joe Rogan, aren't we like legitimizing Joe Rogan? It feels like we're retreading the same arguments that I thought had been sort of granted regarding going on platforms to quote unquote legitimize or not legitimize people. If it's the case that Hassan is influential, and I agree that he is, then where is the disanalogy between going on Joe Rogan and Hassan Piker other than, I guess, the amount of viewers? I agree Joe Rogan is bigger for sure, but put that aside, because I think we both agree that Hassan reaches a threshold of relevance. A lot of these Congress people have like 10K, 20K, have less followers than I do. Okay, so talk to me about that. What's the disanalogy between going on Joe Rogan for a kind of chill conversation like Bernie has had with him and going on Hassan to have a kind of chill conversation?
So I just want to retract a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think there's this analogy there. So at what point did you hear me? So I can understand, like, maybe
I'm not saying that you said that. Sorry. If I said that you said that, I'm sorry. Do you see one? I'll just ask the question.
Do I see a difference? Like, you already adhere to the only difference is the size. Ultimately, is individuals that I do think are problematic, but individuals that have a lot of infamy and fame. And the difference between like going on their platforms, one thing I will say for sure is that Joe Rogan is a yes and type where you could just go in there and just, that's what Tallarico did, and that gave him a lot of infamy.
Yeah.
Yes and he's just like, say whatever, and he's like, oh, that sounds great. That's what Joe Rogan does. Hassan Piker has very clear views that he wants to implement. I think the only view that I think Joe Rogan very clearly wants to establish is like his dissatisfaction with vaccines, about like buying into the whole COVID misinformation stuff. But ultimately, I would say for the most part, he's an open book in terms of like what his podcast allows from the other individual and the prescriptions that they allow to propagate to his audience. I'm more concerned when it comes to like dealing with Hassan Piker that he wants a very intentional description of certain things on his platform in a specific direction. And I can't say for certain he would like cut anything out or anything like this, but I know for a fact, like with his conversation with Adam Mockler, he would moderate a lot of his positions where in reality, a lot of the things that he
right, but that's what Rogan does, right? In terms of, because I agree. I think that Rogan is a people pleaser until you like specifically challenge his ego. And I think Hassan Piker is very similar in that respect. I think that if you give a lot of like outs for Joe Rogan to not be like embarrassed in front of you, they'll take them. And I think that you just laid it out, right? Like Joe Rogan will start agreeing with Bernie Sanders in a conversation, and then 10 seconds later, he'll be like the biggest MAGA Republican blowhard that there's ever been. Hassan Piker will moderate his views because he's a pleaser in front of people. That's a good thing, right? It's good to be on tape. And Mockler maybe even could have afforded to go. I certainly would have been more pressing, a little bit more pressing than Mockler, although I think Mockler did a good job. And I think that my style might not be as good as Mockler's in the specific context with Hassan, because I am more pressing. I am more like deliberate. I'm like, I'm asking you this question. I want it to be answered. And so I don't know that I have the best strategy. But in that context, right, like he's able to extract useful concessions, I think useful concessions from Hassan in that conversation if you follow along. And that I think is on all fours with Joe Rogan.
So I guess the difference of opinion here is I don't think Joe Rogan really has a concrete position platform. I don't think you can concretely say, other than like very surface level, like centristy things, other than like the COVID misinformation stuff of like what he believes. He just like is all vibes. He's not really in the political system. And he believed Donald Trump because he just spouted the populist rhetoric without really knowing anything. Then of course he does all the bad shit like, oh shit, that's bad. Oh damn, oh fuck, or whatever. I think Hassan Piker's positions and platform is much more concrete. And the people, and to be fair, for the people who do know him, can pretty much articulate a lot of the things he's done, said, and what he advocates for. So I think that would be the biggest difference, because
what is it? I mean, so in a couple sentences, like you're saying, well, he has like a kind of worldview, like an interconnected worldview that is internally consistent, or at least it is something broader than just stream of consciousness responses to like a guy that's hopped up on like DMT and that kind of shit. And so like there's perhaps more danger in terms of the ideological framework that Hassan stands for. But it does often and I think that there are a lot of like themes in Hassan's coverage, which are in general anti-West, are certainly anti-Israel, are certainly skeptical of center-left, skeptical of liberals, all that. So I can definitely understand those themes, but like, are you suggesting that similar to someone like Nick Fuentes, there's this kind of coherent worldview that is exportable in a way that Joe Rogan's demeanor isn't exportable?
Got it. You got it right there.
Yeah. No. So my response to that would just be like, I'm not so convinced that the specific tanky aspect of whatever Hassan believes is as in other words, I'm not fearful of Marxist-Leninism taking hold in America. I think what is exportable from Hassan are things like anti-Israel sentiment, for sure, Medicare for all healthcare type proposals, a lot of the anti-Western sentiment, but not so much this kind of like coherent through line of Marxist-Leninist dogma. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm not in fear of that sort of taking hold. And to that extent, I'm not sure that what Hassan does in general is more dangerous than what Joe Rogan does. But even if it is, why is showing up there making it worse?
It's
as a chill conversation.
It's not about showing up there.
Okay.
The value of this conversation is understanding the differences, as you established, which, like I said, I agree with, because I put it in the upfront, and then reacting based off that analysis and handling yourself accordingly. So when it comes down to the situation, I think Mamdani is a very good example, in the sense that he was very clearly attached to people like AOC and Hassan Piker. He has a platform. It's like, okay, I'm unsure. Then a lot of people felt this way. I'm unsure. He's like associated with Hassan. He's probably a socialist. And he, to be fair, was proud to be called a socialist. However, once we saw him campaign, and I've talked to so many Democratic candidates at this point, all of them said, bro, he ran a great campaign. He just did. He ran a great campaign, and you can perfectly articulate what he plans to do and who is he doing it for. And that is, to be fair, very unique. Not a lot of people has run a Mamdani-like campaign, not in terms of the positions, but in terms of how he conducted himself. And I think that is the most important part of the conversation, is how are you conducting yourself to ensure you are not attached to these potential exportable positions that you were referring to before. So when it comes down to individuals and how they kind of deal with someone like a Hassan Piker or Nick Fuentes. Do you want access to their people? Okay, fine. This is how you need to act to ensure that the initial things that people were attaching to Mamdani was like, oh yeah, he probably is like anti-Semite, anti-American. Very quickly was like, oh no, he actually really likes America. And he still doesn't like Jewish people as much, but he's not clearly an anti-Semite. So these are things that I do think are very important to note, very important things to establish. And with dealing with these people, you should. Their audience is important. They are Americans, they are voters, and they are people that can influence elections, as we've seen. How you deal with them, how you articulate who you are in deference to them is the most important part. And it honestly goes full circle with something you mentioned earlier, rhetoric. And now with something that I kind of agree with, presence online. These are all things that people need to pay attention to. And the only reason why I brought up like what some of the people on the Democratic Party are saying about Hassan is not because I'm like, this is destroying his credibility. They are noting the factors to stay away from. They're noting the things that distinguish themselves from. And that is the most important part. So that's kind of like why I'm making these.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to distinguish yourself from bad ideas, certainly. So to the extent that an association, like, there are some people who collaboration with them itself is such a reputational risk that you probably shouldn't interact with them at all. Okay. This is the kind of like Nick Fuentes chill conversation proposals where really what's going on there is we're weighing the fact that, well, maybe we can convince Nick Fuentes and maybe we can have a good moment debating him or at least his audience. Sorry, not convince Nick Fuentes, convince Nick Fuentes' audience or at least 2% of them on a given thing. We're weighing that against the cost. I don't think the cost is in, quote, legitimization, though sometimes it can be. But in the context of the Nick Fuentes conversation, Nick Fuentes is not getting legitimacy from the left, in my view. Or at least there are some, I think, who flirt in that area, but not quite yet. I think there is a risk from reputational harm, and that needs to be weighed, and it's another factor that needs to be considered. It's just undeniable that Nick Fuentes presents a more like just all-purpose reputational risk than someone like Hassan Piker. That is just true. And you can wish it were otherwise. You can say, but look, their ideas are so similar, and they're both anti-Semitic. I happen to think that Nick Fuentes is like incredibly anti-Semitic, much worse than Hassan Piker in practically every respect. But some people think that they're equivalent. But putting that aside, the calculation that Democrats will have to make is how much reputational or brand risk does Hassan present, and is that what is the trade-off between that and any potential benefit? That is going to involve defining what the potential benefit is. Is there a potential benefit? Well, it almost seems self-evident that there's a potential benefit, right? The fact that he is interacting with some of the top Democrats, the fact that he interacted with Mamdani, do we think that those people are rational? Do we think they're just irrational, that they don't see any benefit to being on the biggest political? No, we both agree that there's a potential benefit, and that benefit is self-evident. It's more eyes on you, it's more attention, it's potentially people, not even just necessarily in terms of concrete numbers of people who vote for you, but maybe just like the most diehard people, maybe 2 or 3 people who really get inspired. It's not all about getting voters. Sometimes it's about attracting either elites or attracting high value or high workload individuals that you can even count on one hand. And so there are a lot of weighed benefits here. And the question, I think, it's going to just depend on the context. I'll tell you right now, if I had an opportunity to go on Hassan, I would take it at a heartbeat. And the reasons are manifold, right? One, I'm very interested in a conversation with Hassan. So I would do it just on that alone, is because I just have a natural curiosity. Just like I have conversations with people even who have no clout, who I just am interested by what that conversation would be. 2, I suspect that it would get a lot of attention and eyes on that conversation. That maybe I would get some opportunities from that conversation. 4, I'm hopeful that there's an opportunity presented where I can push him on some views. So a candidate is going to have a different set of hopes and desires out of those conversations. And so what I am having difficulty with is kind of like one size fits all approach to someone like Hassan, where it's just like, oh, he's not in the coalition, thought terminating thing. It's just like, no, people should weigh it in different ways, just like they would, by the way, any encounter with Nick Fuentes. The thing about Fuentes, though, is the reputational risk is just off the charts with Fuentes.
And I agree to that. So the kind of the final stretch of this conversation is very clear at this point. One thing I agree that Nick Fuentes, when it comes down to it, is a reputational risk. I think the cost risk analysis is very clear that if you're a Democrat, there is arguably no benefit to going and on his audience and appealing to his audience, because for the most part they will basically go through one ear out the other. There might be an appeal to pay attention to like what he's doing and who he's appealing to and how much that movement is growing in general, and paying attention to that demographic, because of course they're Americans and there's a lot of them. But going on his platform, I think waste of time. I agree. So then the other aspect is like,
Except to
okay,
debate him, right? I would debate Fuentes on some shit. If there was an encounter that were possible, or there were some other co-hosts, hell, I would even call into Nick Fuentes' show with the right opportunity, if only just to clip it for my own audience and increase my own profile with that way. Again, increasing your profile doesn't always have to be changing the minds of individuals who are in their camp. It might have people who are kind of loosely tuning in see a high profile instance just because it has a high profile person in it. But no, there are definitely encounters that I would have with Nick Fuentes. The chill type encounters, probably less so, but that has to do largely as a factor of reputational risk, not because I think that I would like look at how my size. Like, I'm not going to legitimize him to any extent. I think it would be a risk to my reputation. But that doesn't mean that, like, everyone knows, everyone has like a racist uncle or a someone who has horrible views in their life that they might enjoy like catching a beer with, even if it's they have odious views. I mean, this exists. Now, not everyone. Some people can't get past that. I'm not saying that everyone should be able to get past that, but I just think it really does depend on the situation, even for the most out there, most extreme people.
yeah, I guess that is one of the few differences of opinions we have. I find it hard to be friendly with certain individuals in that sense. But to each your own. Again, I'm not applying this
Yeah.
universally across everybody's mindset to everybody's morality. And then the other aspect of terms of like debating him, I do think that's an interesting calculation. The potentiality of virality to a normally audience, there might be something there. I'm, to be fair, at the very least, I'm not the biggest fan of like political debate
Yeah.
necessarily. Not because I can't do it, but because I don't see a lot of value if we're just doing a bunch of yelling and not really having a conversation that pushes the narrative forward, because politics is meant to create a better society. So that's just my individual opinion. But in terms of like the space that you're in, also, let me give you a little glaze session.
Yeah,
I do
sure.
think you're one to debate with Ryan. I'm not gonna lie. I
Oh,
do
thank
think
you.
you won that.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
I did watch. I was like,
And
bro, Ryan's not addressing any of the
the
points he's
debate
saying.
that matters, though, is the one in the Supreme Court. But yeah, no, and I think that we're going to win that one too. But I appreciate you saying that. But no,
Um,
but that was an encounter where, since you mentioned it, Word War Debate people, you should have seen some of the people that were there. The Proud Boys were there, my guy. Like, it was, who's this mother? Enrico Tarrio was there. I talked to Enrico Tarrio's girlfriend. There were people there that were incredibly right wing, but I did it because I believed in the issue, and I thought that it would, be an opportunity for me to meet some people who might give me other debate situations, and it would be a good demonstration of this issue in front of a crowd, and so that went into it. Even though a lot of the people I disagree with vehemently might even have disgusting views, the fact that the Proud Boys are there, I think that a lot of these Proud Boys are insurrectionists. I mean, Enrico Tarrio is an insurrectionist, but I stood there. And I think there's even a picture of me, a group picture in which he's in it. Now, I'd made that calculation for myself. Some people might say it's gross that you stood in a picture in which you're a couple of people away from Enrico Tarrio, but that's the reality. I thought the cost-benefit analysis worked in my favor in that very debate that you're mentioning.
and of course, that's an analysis everybody does have to make for themselves. But that is also the thing that a lot of people are debating on. Like, are we properly analyzing the encounters we are doing right now? And that's kind of like what we have to figure out. Like, this is what I mean by the final stretch in terms of
Yeah.
conduct for individuals. So for me, at the very least, I'm gonna speak on me. I have spoken with a pretty loony MAGA guy on my podcast.
Yeah.
So what happened in that conversation is he came here to talk about something, and then I was like, oh, he's MAGA, and I was like, I don't really want to talk about what he wants to talk about, but I do think this would be an interesting conversation to see, like, why do you think the way you think? And you can imagine how it went. Like, I
Yeah.
don't do like the gotcha stuff necessarily, but I was asking a lot of questions, going like, "Why do you think that? Why do you think that?" And all the questions are typical MAGA jargon with no evidence. So that's just basically how that confrontation went. But there was very clear distinguishing line that, I'm not on this guy's side in this particular circumstance. And then I've spoken with people that are on the right, that are probably more sane, center left, of course, and conducting myself differently based off the individuals who I like more, of course, and who I agree with more. So all that is like paying attention to like how I handle them, how do I discuss them. And my podcast for the most part brings on a lot of people, but there's one conversation that I had that I'm personally dissatisfied with.
Okay.
This guy who's running for Republican in California as a governor. He's a Republican candidate for governor. He's a big Christian guy, and South Korean, I believe, as well. He came in, and we're having a conversation, and I was like curious to see like where we're gonna go here. And in my opinion, even though I handled myself well generally to the average person that don't see this conversation, when he started talking about how he doesn't believe in separation of church and state and how he couldn't back up any evidence he was making about California, because after I looked into like California and Gavin Newsom, I think there's a lot of misinformation there. I should have went much harder on that stuff because I can't just allow that to be a perception if it's not reality. So
there's two kind of dangers, right? So that I'm hearing from you. The first kind of danger has to do with like not that there's a danger of subterfuge where a viewer is not going to notice a distinction between the person on stage and someone who might masquerade as an ally. So like they might get the wrong impression that this person is one of us in the kind of associational sense, and that has a negative signaling value, perhaps reputational harm, but certainly in for the viewer to make a distinction between people who we don't want to generally promote as opposed to for the specific purpose of whatever, candidate. So that's one area where there's a problem.
To add on to what you just said there, there's also the potentiality of normalizing an individual who can expand his positions and normalizes the positions by extension.
Got it.
So that's another
either by not doing sufficient pushback like you just described, or in other ways just having the view be expressed at all. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. All right. I mean, I hear that, and I acknowledge that those are two potential risks in terms of distinction. Having it so that there's a well orchestrated surreptitious individual might be able to masquerade as something that they're not, and for whatever reason that's a harm. I just think the solution to that is often make the distinction clear. Yes, I disagree, just like Mamdani did, right? He and I disagree on a whole host of issues, right? I don't agree that America deserved 9/11. Or do what you think that you should have done more is like when those views are brought up, express that this is not right, this is not correct, or whatever. If it truly is an issue of, well, we don't want to legitimize, we don't even want to have that view expressed at all, I think I'm going to want to have an identity of what that view that's so dangerous to be expressed is. I would understand it in terms of like a lot of genuinely anti-Semitic rhetoric that is disgusting. Maybe we wouldn't want that anywhere like on our platform or show. Any certain like slurs that are used, I can totally understand that. But I think that the solution to that is either preventing that specific view from being expressed, or if it's not that, then it's suggesting that there's like a broader reputational risk that should make you rethink even having the person on in the platform in the first place. So all of those things I think are genuine. What you just said are genuine considerations that everyone who is making these kinds of decisions should make. My solution or my response though is just, it's not a one size fits all thing. Just like it's not a one size fits all for how you interact with crazy conservatives or centrists. That is what I'm trying to, what I'm frustrated with is when everyone's like, just treat them as though they're not in part of the coalition. Just treat them as though they're not an ally. Just treat them as though they're not part of our team. That these kinds of truisms aren't very useful for people who actually want to actualize and like make a decision. That's all I'm saying.
And I hear that. I will say like words matter in a situation in terms of like making it very clear what your stance is. But I do think there is also like a more natural understanding, probably more effective understanding of like actions, inflection. Like if I made a terrible opinion about Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Said like, hey man, I would say Obi-Wan Kenobi sucks, which I don't agree with. I love Obi-Wan.
He's good.
Obi-Wan Kenobi sucks. And someone hears that, Pastor Star Wars fan, their response is, one, disagree. Two, they might react very viscerally. Three, they might go on a huge argument on like why you're wrong. So we see this consistently in how things are very clearly divided upon. And maybe this is kind of the dramatization of political conversations that have been established because of the current era. Maybe it's because of Trump. Maybe it started before. Maybe it was Kennedy who started it, or maybe it's the social media. Hard to say. But one thing that is without a doubt is that it's necessary now. And not only is it necessary to perform, to say certain things, but it's also necessary to ensure that your positions are clear. So it is multifaceted. I don't think it's a one fit all, but I do think there are clear things that we all can understand in normal conversation that when you apply this, even in politics, or can be equally as valuable.
100%. I mean, I'm a big believer that body language and like how one is delivering something is almost more communication than what the person is actually saying. I'm sure if I conducted this entire time being like, yeah, that's a really great point, Radell. And you know what, like, or Radell. And I just want to add to that. And I said the exact same thing. Like, people will get the sense that this was like an incredibly collaborative, even more collaborative than the discussion, which I've really enjoyed so far, that we've been having. I think that they would get the impression that with like overwhelming agreement, even if I'm just communicating the exact same thing. And so people need to be aware, I think, of like how one presents themselves and how friendly they seem, even when they're not talking about anything political. I don't think that all the opposition I think that a lot of the opposition to Hasan Piker is not substantive in the position sense. I think a lot of it is personal. A lot of it is grievance. I do think a lot of it is also substantive. I'm not saying that there's not that as well. They run the gamut in terms of the level of the offensiveness of the position or what was said. Really, if we're going back to everything that Hasan Piker has said, a lot of it is like just not good. But is it really something that shocks the conscious? Does it shock the conscious anymore? I mean, when we have like every day the most insane speech from the alleged president, and even frankly among a lot of Democrats who say fucking fucked up shit as well. I'm not saying that all of them on the same level as everything Hasan said, but like the capacity for surprise seems a lot exaggerated to me, even if I think the view is reprehensible itself. And I do think a lot of these views are reprehensible. And all I'm trying to say there is I'm trying to isolate from the substantive criticism, the criticism regarding personal grievance or bad faith or him doxing people or him not paying people or him not living up to his ideals, all the character flaws stuff. And I'm just trying to get to the prescription. Right? I'm just trying to get to like, how should Democrats behave? And my response to that is, I think it depends. I think that probably most Democrats should go on his stream if they want to get use of his audience or appeal to their audience, even if it's going to be a little bit contentious. I think just showing up to places and getting reps in is important. So my default would be to engage almost anywhere. And no, I'm not necessitated by that opinion to say, well, go show up on Nick Fuentes America First. You can be mad about it, but there just is a different reputational risk associated with Nick Fuentes among Democrats than Hasan Piker. And you can work to even change that if you're like very, very anti-Hasan. But my default presumption for Democrats is to engage with people, even people who we disagree with vehemently. And that would include Joe Rogan, who has odious beliefs. That would include Bill Maher, who supports this war. That would include Sam Harris, who supports this war. That would include people who are still like centrist, like let's say Joe Manchin had a podcast. He didn't endorse Kamala. If Talibots has a podcast, I would say, and she blows up, go on that podcast. If Counterpoints has a podcast, they should show up there. Like, they should show up more. They should do more reps, even when people have disgusting views. And they should have a high tolerance, not a perfect tolerance for reputational risk, but just a high tolerance. That's all I'm saying. And I think that that's just a bar that Hasan is usually going to clear.
I will say, yeah. I mean, in terms of elections, he's on the left. He appeals to left-wing voters. So I think that is undeniable. And I think people should agree to it. I will say a lot of the conversations that do take place regarding like Hasan Piker, ex individual, and I've taken think into account like the thought exercise too, a lot of it is meaningless at the end of the day. I think when it comes down to it, when it comes to individuals, understand the value of what they can provide, and of course, you contextualize like where they provide X value. But also, I think it's also fine to say that anybody who I believe personally, is like anti-American, yeah, there's severity of bad. You're bad. Like
Yeah.
you're the enemy. It just it is what it is. And moving forward in terms of like dealing with these individuals and potentially like extensions of the individuals is a careful analysis that you have to weigh in and how you conduct. At the very least, I will say make sure that your platform, who you are, is very concrete to the point where there is no potential misconstruing on who you are in relation to the enemy. And that's kind of like the most important part of the conversation, I would say.
No, I agree with that. I think that those distinctions should be made. Certainly for influencers, I think that we should push back. I thought Mockler did a decent job. I really don't understand everyone being upset with Mockler. When I said that he was a communist in response to that, was me parodying and being like, come on, he's not a communist. He's just, I think, being a normal person trying to convince people to vote for Democrats and even being insistent at different times. So, I mean, I totally agree that you should make those distinctions clear, as Mamdani did. 100%. Definitely agree with that. The only thing that I take issue with is this whole like generalizing, capacious language that is kind of unclear and muddy about like, well, he's an enemy. It needs to be acknowledged he's not part of the tent. Like that to me is not clear. It's not clear language. If it means that we don't agree on fundamental positions, then yes, he's not part of the tent because we don't agree on fundamental positions. That's just not a very useful thing, I think, for people to actualize. And I think that there is like, if you can't make the case that it's useful for Democrats to go on Hassan Piker's show, how can we make the case that it's useful for Democrats to come on like my show or on Lib and Learn or any of these like incredibly smaller shows? I think that there is. I think that there's, it's not just in the amount of voters and people who watch and engage with the show. It's to create a kind of synergy, create a space, communication, back and forth. And now think about with Hassan and Mamdani, Hassan like owns a little bit of Mamdani's success and failures. And maybe he is going to be, if Mamdani really betrays whatever, Hassan will turn, but there's going to be at least some amount of inertia, some amount of pressure now that he has been, I think, to keep him invested in Mamdani's success. That's not always true, and it may not be true of Hassan, but I think it's something. And it's somewhere where I think liberals can make a lot of hay. The last thing I'll say on this topic is I keep coming back to, and I know this means I instantly lose any debate or whatever, the Weimar Republic shit. Trotsky, absolutely an authoritarian, absolutely somebody who, grew out of that Leninist tradition and would have instituted a one-party state if he were in control, unlike Stalin. I mean, he had his different views ideologically on Stalin, but he was principally against liberalism. He encouraged the communists in Germany who didn't do this to make common cause with the liberals in that moment. Why? Because they were about to get run the fuck over by fascism, and everyone was going to go down. Now, we are not exactly in the same moment. I think that I'm white-pilled about the Democrats' odds of success, independent of any kind of alliance or anything like that. I'm white-pilled about our potential to grow. I think that the fascist movement in this country is too slow right now, and they're too incompetent, and they're worried about their own interests. But we're not off of the plane yet. It's not over yet. We are still in danger, and we cannot lose sight of that every day we're living under this authoritarian control by Trump, where he is doing unprecedented things, that there may come a moment where, unfortunately, we have to make common cause with our enemies, because otherwise we're all fucking dead. That's what we criticize the communists for not doing in the context of the Weimar Republic. So you have to understand, I am not a Marxist-Leninist. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I never consider myself those things. I'm a pragmatist at heart. I'm a materialist at heart, I guess, in some respect. But I'm viewing all of this in the lens of we are in danger. We're in danger. There's a big anvil over our head. Hopefully we'll get out of it. But my statements and my positions need to be seen in that context.
Which I do think is fair if we kind of reach that existential crisis for sure. And who knows?
When I say materialist, sorry. So, but when I say materialist, I should be like, I am bounded by the material. I mean materialism in the sense of like, I'm not focused on some kind of other spiritual goal or anything. That's what I mean by materialism, not like materialism in the Marxist sense. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I think overall, when it comes down to it, the concept is very reasonable, understandable. However, I think you agreed, we're just not there yet. Not yet. And then of course the analysis you have to bring about is if you let them in too early, could they erode it quicker? And that is also the very important part of the conversation, because you even have, like, of course, we had the whole conversation about Aslan, but this is always important to bring up. And I did bring it up with Z as well. Like, Fuentes said he would vote Democrat. Now, I don't think Fuentes is on my side, but he did say, and he's encouraging his people to also vote Democrat. So we are in a bad situation. I'm also white-pilled. I do think we can do very well in the midterms. I do think a Democrat will win presidency. I do think we need to do a lot of ambitious policy change moving forward. Complacency, I don't think, is permitted as of right now. If we do reach that point where Trump does do weird shit with the elections, which I do think it seems like they're trying. He does try to do a third term. He does try to co-opt the military to do crazy shit. Then I do think a legitimate conversation needs to be had in terms of like expanding our coalition. But I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, just a bit like when it comes to like the Groypers voting for Democrats, I think it's a great example of like, what do we do about that? We can't do anything about that. It's good that they're going to vote for Democrats because it's votes for Democrats. But it's like people will sort of ask it as though, or say it as though like, well, would you accept those votes? I'm like, we can't change it, right? If the question was, will I take the votes or not take the votes? Yeah, I'll take the votes. Give me your fucking money, right? Like, shit. Have you ever seen The Wire?
Unfortunately not. My friend says it's the best show of all time.
It's a really good show. I'll take anyone's money if he's just giving it away. Now, I don't think that's really true that you'll take anyone's money. But when it comes to votes, these are anonymous anyway. They're all fungible. I don't understand like what even is the dilemma when it comes to like accepting or not accepting. Yes, we should encourage Groypers to vote for Democrats. We should encourage everyone to vote for Democrats. We're not in the bit. We need to win these elections by insane margins, like we saw in Wisconsin recently for this Wisconsin Supreme Court pick, and the overperformance in Marjorie Taylor Greene's old seat by like plus 25, 26 seats. We need to win a Senate that's robust enough to give us the votes to fuck up this filibuster and enact an agenda that works for working people. And that's going to mean overperforming and getting voters we don't usually get. And so, like, yeah, I'm going to encourage everyone to vote for Democrats. And if I had 2 minutes to plug on Nick Fuentes' show, I would say, listen, Groypers, we disagree on a lot of things, but I'll tell you this, Joe Biden wouldn't have gotten us in that war in Iran. That's what he tried not to do. And you better bet your ass that if a Democrat is in the office, in the White House, or at least in Congress, we're going to have more accountability over the people who brought you into this war. I'll tell you that much. So I would make that pitch to them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. Would I let a Groyper decide what our foreign policy is? Fuck no. Would I let a Groyper decide our immigration policy or our domestic policy? No, I wouldn't do that. But would I be willing to take, their help to like save the country? Yes. And it depends on which sense, but yes, I would.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought an example for that, because that I was going to like, it depends on how you encourage them. You don't want to capitulate to some of their crazy ideas, but in your situation, you just pretty much reframed the position you already hold and just pointed it at them. It's like, you hold this position too, vote this way. We're still not on the same side, but this guy's worse in this particular circumstance. And I do think that is effective. Overall, yeah, I mean, this is very valuable conversation to kind of figure out like how we conduct ourselves, how we deal with deal with these individuals. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, we all want Democrats to win because MAGA is very, 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 very bad. We all understand what these bad actors are. I would also suggest that when it comes down to these like circumstances, for if we already established that this person is the enemy, I do think that this kind of plays into like what you're showing people. There should be there's no utility in having arguments where at any point you have to prop that side up. That's why like at first I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
if it's too much
Hassan
work,
stuff
if
is
it's
like, oh, it's funny, but
Yeah.
it's like if I have to defend Hassan over another guy who's clearly my enemy, what am I doing?
Well, that's the problem.
This is
Like,
a losing
no,
battle
I agree with the frustration there. I tell you why I'm frustrated is because I will answer those questions because I'm fucking crazy and like I'll tell you when I want to answer questions, but I like engaging in these thought experiments. But they're totally useless. Like Hassan versus Epstein, in a sense, it's kind of useless. Other than to just like generate clicks and stuff. I mean, it can get down to your brass tacks on values or your presumptions on like what would happen. But I understand the frustration when people say like, what's the point of these hypotheticals? And after a while, they can become fucking annoying or maybe even destructive and cause more problems than they solve. I unfortunately am like obsessed with these thoughts. Like I will just answer it and just like go, try to go through all this stuff. So, but I'm not convinced that it's the best strat to do that. I get frustrated by them a lot, and no doubt, there's plenty of disagreement to voice against Hassan and to say in terms of your ideas and all that stuff. I totally agree on that. It just the question is, and I'm honest and fair about it. Like I don't do stuff with Progressive Victory. I obviously we canceled the whole New York thing with Destiny, but I don't say don't work with Progressive Victory if you're a Democratic person. I don't say don't go on Destiny's show. I don't do that. Even when it's like a situation in which I might not be going on his show, or I might not want to do that for other reasons. You don't see me going around saying deplatform this person, deplatform that person, or don't even interact even casually with people, whatever. And I understand there's differences here. But I'm just saying that like I really do want what's best for Democrats. I really do want to get Democrats elected. And if I calculate that there's a good idea to get there, or at least one that isn't horrible and it's not that risky, I'm not going to be like, no, you have to do this kind of austere thing. And if I'm not convinced by it, so that's my view on it.
Fair enough. I think this was a good conversation. I do think there is plenty of other things I would be interested in discussing with you in terms of like what the Democratic vision looks like. But that would have to be
from like an ideology perspective, you mean, right?
Not necessarily. I do think it's more so on more policy prescriptions, reforms, and what that looks like in general. And like I do think there's an interesting, and this kind of comes to like a conversation I had before in terms of a level of complacency in terms of not ensuring that the people are evolving with the system that was not properly applied as the years go by, and that dissatisfaction grew, of course, into like what we have now, and then of course adapting properly to the evolution of humanity because of social media, AI, all that stuff. Like these are very important things that Democrats, because I don't trust Republicans, have to contend with. And if they don't adapt properly, then Republicans will find a new way to kind of co-opt the message with like bad tactics like they did with Charlie Kirk in terms of manipulating college students. So
I'm happy to talk about that and happy to keep this. I really enjoyed the conversation, man. I really did. And I think that I think you had a lot, like you're raising genuine concerns. Absolutely. It shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, let's go just hang out with Hassan and like not think about it a little bit or how we're going to do it or how we're going to like position ourselves. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm not saying that you're not raising genuine concerns, or that some of what you say isn't true. And I appreciated the back and forth.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. And to be fair, it is annoying dealing with all these different sides. I consider myself the political breakdown, and the amount of times I've been called, I just got called MAGA recently in the chat.
Oh yeah.
So MAGA, I've been called leftist. I've been called everything on the sun. But at the end of the day, I also say very confidently, I hate MAGA. I hate people who are anti-American. I really dislike the anti-American leftists. I say this consistently, and I joke and clown them all the time. So it's just like not really buying into the trap. It's like, hey man, I know who I am and I'm confident of that. And that is important. That's important for people. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we got for today's podcast episode. Appreciate you coming on, Pisco. I thought this was a great conversation. Had my opinions about you, but I always think it's better to have a conversation with the person
100%.
To kind of solidify, like, okay, what do you really think? And I pretty much get the sentiment, which intuitionally, I feel like Pisco's a little bit more empathetic than I am in terms of being able to, being willing to communicate with certain people. I mean, we brought up so many examples of that. That's fine. I'm okay with it. It's just difference of how.
Just to be clear, like, not everyone's standard for maintaining like a cordial or personal relationship with another person equals to how evil or good that person is. Like, there are some people who, like, their standard for dealing with people interpersonally is the same as, like, I only deal with good people, right? There are those such people. There are other people who just have different qualities that they're looking for in individuals that they have personal relationships and they're willing to sacrifice maybe a little bit on the morality scale because of other benefits. Or maybe this person's a good listener. Maybe they're actually trustworthy. Maybe so we just shouldn't conflate one's willingness to engage with a person for personal reasons, which is like, could be closely aligned to their views on morality or ethics or politics, but doesn't have to be. And I certainly don't judge you because you take a different line. And certainly, I'm sure I have some lines. I don't really want to hang out with most of my friends being racists. And I'm sure if I was like, would I really be friends with someone who was like prejudiced against people with big eyebrows or bushy eyebrows and like hated me as a person? Maybe not. So everyone's going to have those lines, and I certainly am not judging you for those.
And that's what political discourse is supposed to be about, with ideological differences or differences in certain identities that play into how your perspective evolves. But as long as we're on the same page, a better America, better liberalism. That's all we want. With that said, hope you guys enjoyed. Rate the podcast 5 stars if you did. You have a good one. Take care and peace.
Thank you, Radell. I really appreciate it, man.
No problem. I thought this was a great conversation.
Awesome.
And it's not often I get to speak with like other individuals that are so in tune with like all the different aspects of what we talked about today.
Yeah, no, I think the word for that is very online. Is that fair?
Very true. Not definitely nobody that knows all your drama that's going on. I've been paying attention. I
appreciate that. I appreciate that. All right, man. I'll see you around. Okay.
You have a good one.
Peace out. Okay, folks. You guys have any questions? I don't know how long I'll stick around, but I think what I'll do is I'll just see. I'll just talk a little quick about the this Twitter thing. Just give me a second. I'll just talk real quick about this Twitter thing. What do? I do this, and then if you guys have questions and stuff. So first, on this Twitter thing, why don't I just show you? Why me talk it when I just show you? When I just show. We do a little copy link. We do a little one of these. We do one of these, and we do one of those. So people don't get the wrong impression. Okay. Boom. So Hutch was responding to Kyle Kalinske, who in response to like a Josh Shapiro saying America shouldn't be bullied by Israel, a sentiment that I agree with, and I feel that we are being bullied by Israel, and the alleged president is being bullied, that Kyle Kalinske said he was literally in the IDF. And Hutch put out and highlighted a part of a quote that said, the program also included service on an IDF force base, an experience he described as being, quote, a past volunteer in the Israeli army. And my response to that was, well, hang on a second. Like, I was taking that as an assumption that this was true, that basically that Josh Shapiro was correctly describing this experience. And so I just I took the quote and I found it and it was accurate. and he said, I'm a past volunteer in the Israeli army. And so I just think that it analytically, now what I think happened here is that Shapiro either embellished or lied. It is a false statement. So I'm not saying lied to have that moral weight of it. It's a false statement, right? Because it appears to be that he was like part of some other program that worked like inside an IDF base or something, doing like things for the IDF, but not as part of the organization. And so I just view that as different than working in the army. So it just seems that like it's not true that he was in the IDF, but I didn't know that at the time when I sort of read this quote. I'm just like, wait, if he's volunteering in the army, he's in the army like analytically by definition, okay? And so you'll see like a lot of back and forth between us. I'm saying, well, like if he's like, you can be a volunteer in a thing, okay? And it's not just this is not like something that's inconceivable or not allowed. Like there are volunteers who are inside in organizations, which by the way, I take to be like part of the organization, okay? That you are a member of the organization. Now, if you're just like a contractor, there is such thing as like informally being in something, but like if you're just a contractor or you're doing like a one-off job or something, I wouldn't consider you in the organization if like you're being hired as an outsider. But there's a difference between like an outsider and an insider, right? Again, sometimes it's difficult cases, but I just take someone to be in an organization if they are beholden to that organization's structure and like control, in other words. But all that is to say is I think it is analytically true that if you're a volunteer in the Israeli army, you are in the Israeli army, at least in the normal, ordinary usage of those terms. And so that's what I was trying to get at, and that's what I'm going to hear. If Josh Shapiro volunteered in the Israeli army, then he was in the Israeli army. And I think that would be true if you're like a cook in the army, right? I worked as a cook in the army. You're in the army, right? I worked as a barber in the Navy. You were in the Navy. Now, that's assuming you actually are in the Navy, right? That's assuming that you're representing that correctly. But if it is a correct representation that you're in an organization, then you are in the organization, right? If I worked as a volunteer intern, an intern at a like U.S. Attorney's Office, let's say that you're like a 2L and you're doing some U.S. Attorney's Office internship for free, let's say, you're in the U.S. Attorney's Office. You're working in the U.S. Attorney's Office. You worked in the U.S. government. You worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's just like analytically true, right? And it's conditional, right? So if it's true that he volunteered in the Israeli army, as he said he did in this, right? He did say he was a past volunteer in the Israeli army, right? So if that is true, then it's true that he was in the army. And like, there seems to be like a big response to me that I'm somehow dissing Josh Shapiro or that like something I'm doing is bad faith. It is not bad faith at all for me to say, hey, like I'm taking this statement as given. Now, it turns out that statement, like there could be a good basis to believe it's a bad statement. It's a wrong statement that Shapiro made. I'm not even saying it's like, oh, he maliciously lied. These are things that college kids do. It was years ago. I'm not trying to say that he's a horrible person because that happened, but I am just saying, right? I am just saying that I think it just logically follows if the statement were true that he would be in the army. And I'm not trying to like fuck with Hutch here. I was just like, wait, I read that. I'm like, hold on a second. I see this quote, right? A fast volunteer in the army. And I see the second part, which is at no time was he engaged in military activities. I'm like, well, you don't need to be engaged in military activities to be in the army. And so my first thing was like, all right, I'm going to find this quote because it's like, this is weird. Because I just didn't, I thought that reasoning was off. And I'll often do this. I'm not just trying to spread the meme that he was in the IDF. I'm just like, I'm assuming that this is true, that Shapiro's representation is true, but it's false, right? It is a false representation. Again, not saying that I'm not judging him that it's false, but it is a false statement, it seems, based on like the organization he was working for. So yeah, that's all I was saying here. And then you have like some people. I even agree that Kyle should not have made that mistake, right? And it doesn't matter what in means. It's there's a unity, there's a parity, right? Like in is in both words, unless you think that like volunteer in has like a different ordinary usage of in than in some other way. But no, I take in with respect to an organization to mean like part of the insiders, as opposed to the outsiders. You're a member of the organization. That is, you're a member of the Israeli army. You get me? So I just think that that's true. And I say, I don't think that there's any distance. Yeah, I think that Kyle should have definitely checked that. He should have definitely checked that. And if he knew this, then I think that that's a even worse problem, right? But I'm not like trying to catch Hutch. I'm just like genuinely was puzzled by this. And I think I'm eminently reasonable in these entire exchanges. And again, I'm not even criticizing Hutch for his responses there. Other people were like super like unhinged. I feel like they were like, "You're bad faith. Why do you ask these questions?" And it's like, can you cool it for 2 seconds? So yeah, that's the Twitter thing. I just figured I'd mention that for 2 seconds. What else? And I hope you guys agree with that like syllogism. If you're volunteering in an organization, you are in the organization. Josh Shapiro volunteered in an organization, therefore Josh Shapiro was in the organization. I think that is a valid logical argument. Now, I think he didn't volunteer in the organization. I think he volunteered in a way in which it was helpful for that organization, but not as a member of it. Okay? And I would enthusiastically vote for Josh Shapiro if he were the nominee. He's not my first choice, but I certainly would enthusiastically vote and endorse Josh Shapiro were he the nominee. Okay? And there's no need to, like, I feel whenever there's like a question I have of a Democrat, and this was also true when I posted about when I was like, Democrats should all call, and I disagree with the Pod Save people on this. They're like, oh, it doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be calling on Democratic members necessarily to say that Trump should be impeached. Like, I think that you should. I think that everyone should be calling for his impeachment. I don't think that it hurts us at all. I don't think that it's promising the voter something that we can't deliver on. I just think that it's a signal that he's done really, really awful shit, and that's one of the reasons why we need to get as much Democratic members in Congress as possible is to hold him to account. Not because I'm like sanguine. Is that a word? Sanguine? No, not sanguine. It's there's a word like that means optimistic. Not that I'm optimistic about the prospects of actually successfully removing him from office. I'm not optimistic about that. Okay, that's a tangent point. I make that point, right? Let me see if I can find it somewhere here. This was crazy. We should talk about this. We should really talk about this guy for 2 seconds. Where is it? And also Kushner and Witkoff. Like, what are these guys doing? Where did I say this? Oh, here it is. So I say Democratic leadership in both House and Senate must be completely unified with members in supporting impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. Anything less is unacceptable. Props to those who come out now. I'm just calling on our leadership to endorse impeachment measures against Trump. I do think that's what they should do. I think that's a strong signal. I think that's what we want to see. I want to see that, and people want to see that. That's my view on it. You can disagree, whatever. It's a sincerely held belief. And what does this guy say? He says, all right, this guy says everything you say is so gay. What did this other guy say? He goes, where is it? First of all, they're calling me lefty. Okay. Buckaroo. Shut up, go blow Hassan. No, there was some guy who was like, why don't you say this to Republicans? Or you should be saying this to Republicans. And I'm like, bro, I have. I did that first. The very first thing I did was, where is it? I said, wake up. That was the first thing I did, was go after Republicans in response to the genocidal threat. For whatever reason, like, there's just this sense of insane sensitivity towards good faith critique of Democrats that I levy. And I do. Look at my fucking perfect endorsements that I posted. It's not even a difficult question. President Biden has my full and complete endorsement for the 2024 presidential election. But this is like whining, boring, like, you're a lefty. If you have any criticism, like, fuck you. I don't give a shit. I've been voting for Dems my entire life. I don't give a fuck. You can go cry about it. I'm not going to stop criticizing Democrats, especially because leadership right now is net negative among Democrats. And it's not just because the quote, the tankies are ruining their reputation. That's not it. That's copium, right? These lefties who don't even have influence, right? That's not why. Me and the majority of Democrats actually don't approve of Democratic leadership in Congress. And for people to get like butthurt, where is the comment? I'm just going over the same ones. I don't know why it doesn't show. Maybe he deleted it or something. Maybe. I just find that whenever I critique Democrats on it, it's also with the Biden pardons of his son. They're like, wow, you really think that Biden did something corrupt? Yeah, I do think that Biden did something corrupt. I'm not just going to say that that's not the case because I'm a Democrat and because I support Democrats. You think I'm a worm? Think I'm some kind of rat who doesn't recognize his own party when they do something wrong? Yeah, the the pardon was corrupt. Thank you so much for the gifted memberships. But it's like, oh, you can't say that. You can't say that because that means you're a tanky. That means you're a tanky. Bruh. I don't give a fuck. I'm going to keep doing me. I'm going to keep criticizing people when I feel they deserve it. I just don't think you gain nothing from doing it. I just don't think you gain nothing from doing it. Sometimes the thing is, if I were thinking about it in that way, how to be most strategic in terms of garnering an audience or something, I would be behaving incredibly different. I would just I would just feed you guys slop and just do everything differently. If that were my goal, and I do appreciate the support, the memberships, all that stuff, right? Like, if my goal were just to maximize this is both a way I get money from it. Thank you so much. And I do support, it means a lot. But additionally, it's to express my own views, my actual views. And I think that there's a long-term interest in establishing a community that expects consistency from me. That's what you're going to get when I release the edit of my coverage of Ethan Klein's anti-free speech lawsuit against Noah Samsen. And I don't care that it inures to the benefit of Noah Samsen in this instance, because I'm going to stand on that principle so that the audience can expect, well, if they want someone who actually cares about free speech, we'll go to Pisco because he's consistent even when his own side doesn't like it. And I think that will give more weight to when I do choose to support something or when I do cut against the grain. I think it's a long-term interest of mine. It's also how I want to operate, just because it feels natural to me. I don't want to be fake about my positions. And so if someone asks me, what do you think about these pardons? I'm like, it's corrupt. Do I say it's the same corruptness as Trump? No. Do I say in some ways it's Trumpian? Yeah, I have no problem using Trumpian as an adjective. That doesn't mean it's the exact same in everything. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. No, there's this also tendency. I find it really among everyone. And so this is not like a just one political side thing to over narrow any kind of analysis where I'll ask, for example, I saw Pete Buttigieg do really well on a segment where he's talking about inflation and trying to get the other asshole MAGA apologist to be like, yes, the number of the inflation number is bigger than 3. Okay. He spent, I think 30 to 40 seconds until eventually the host was like, I might even just show you this clip. This is crazy. I promise I'll get back to the original point.
And look, I'm saying this as somebody who knows what it's like to be sent to war by a U.S. president. Okay. And when a president sends you to war, when you and your buddies are on that gray tail plane going into a war zone, you do it with some level of confidence, some level of assurance that your chain of command, all the way up to the President of the United States, would not do this if they didn't have a choice.
Now that we're there, do you hope this has a successful outcome? There were 40,000 Iranians.
First of all, what a stupid question. Do you hope this has a successful outcome? No, I hope this has a failed outcome. Are you serious? What a question. So first of all, I like roll my eyes like, do you hope this works out successfully? Yeah, I hope it's successful. But obviously success, we measure maybe success differently than each other, okay? But I obviously want to succeed and not to fail.
That were slaughtered.
Now, if what you mean by success is to like further escalation and ratcheting up this illegal war, if that's what you mean by success, where America is weaker, Iran is stronger, and we get involved in a conflict that costs us billions of dollars, and ultimately we are not successful, which I think would be the most likely outcome for a massive escalation. America wouldn't have the stomach for it. If that were the case, if that's what you mean by successful, then I don't think that that's successful. Then no, I don't want to be successful, if that's what you mean by successful. But I think it's a fucking stupid question. Keep watching People Which I promise I'm getting to my point. I'll get to the point.
Regime.
I won't forget it.
47 years of killing Americans, stirring trouble all around the world.
And how do you feel about that regime being left intact by this president?
I don't know if that's going to be the case, and I don't know what might happen.
Is
that an argument?
So you don't want this to work, and it was just a bad move. You want us to pull out now?
Well, look, there's no obvious way out now, but I want to make sure.
This is true, by the way, and I hope I'm interpreting Pete in good faith here that he would want to stop an illegal and unconstitutional war. And what he means by that is there's no good way out. That is to say there's no good strategy. I agree with this. Like this, we're going to be worse off, and there's no like good solution. There's only like a least bad solution in that sense. There's no like easy thing to do to make this all good. So I'm interpreting Pete in good faith here.
Sure that this ends in a way that, first of all, our economy can recover. That
True.
We're not paying so much for gas. I mean, right now, oil's $100.
That to me indicates that he wants to make a deal with Iran, which needs to happen. It needs to happen because it's the least bad option. Now, the deal is going to be horribly skewed in Iran's favor compared to what we could have gotten earlier.
Jet fuel's $200.
So that indicates to me that he wants. Anyway, I digress.
Gas is over $4. Diesel's like $5.50.
You averaged 380 under Biden for 4 years.
Yeah, and when we left, inflation was lower than it is today.
You accounted for 21.5% price increase.
This president took the inflation rate up. This president took the inflation rate up. It's more than 3% year on year. You saw the numbers just come out.
Basic fact. You just saw the numbers. We just showed you the numbers. We left you with 3. It's higher.
It's more than 3% year on year.
Okay.
There's PCE, there's core.
It is. The math is direct.
The math is direct.
It fluctuates each month from 2.7 to 3%.
It's
Look at him.
Than when he got here,
It's
Joe.
not 9%.
His central campaign promise was he was going to take inflation and drive it down, and instead he took inflation and it's up.
I thought in the Fed
And he won't give ground. It's crazy.
When he got here, and now it's more.
Look at how basic he has to go.
It's higher than when he got here,
It's
Joe.
not 9%.
His central campaign promise was he was going to take inflation
Look at this.
and drive it down, and instead he took inflation and it's up.
I thought in the Fed
It was 3 when he got here, and now it's more. It could not be simpler than that.
It's around 3, and we're involved in a war.
He said on day one it would go down. He came in on day one, and now it's up.
Look at this guy starts laughing.
Up to 3%. It was 21.
He can't accept it.
He promised it would go down
over 4 years. Over 4 years, it was 21.5%.
He promised it would go down.
Democrats own the affordability crisis.
Listen to me.
Period.
He's laughing.
Why did the president fail to keep his
You don't think Democrats own
It's like me, right? You're laughing. We are laughing. We are laughing at
the
you.
affordability crisis?
Why did the president fail to keep his promise to lower prices, in your opinion?
I'm laughing because this piece of it is basic. The president did say that he wanted to be in office to bring inflation down, and he has not brought inflation down. That's all.
He drove it up. He never.
Like, this is just a good moment, right? It's just a really good moment of Pete Buttigieg cooking this like stupid apologist. He can't give ground on anything because these are all hacks. By the way, this is what everyone wants me to be like. They want me to be like this guy and just be like not accepting objective reality, or at least my own view on stuff, and just like lie about stuff. Another example of this is that guy, Ben, whatever his name is, that goes on Piers Morgan all the time, who just like, there is no condition under which he won't glaze Trump. He's just a hack. He's just a hired gun. Well, they didn't hire me. I'm not hired by the Democrats. Okay. So I'm not going to do that. All right. Maybe one day I'll be a fearless advocate and I'll have everything will be just for my one client who hires me, but that's not what it is right now. And look at what this guy says. He's a literal CIA plant who worked for bread price fixing corporations. He's straight up evil, dude. What the fuck? And I don't even know if he knows what he means. Like, and I'm just asking, like, what do you mean by CIA plant? And look at how narrow he's getting. He's like, a CIA plant is a McKinsey consultant turned intelligence officer magically running for president. Like, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you what a CIA plant is. And then he asks me a question. I'm like, well, I'm just asking you what you mean. At this point, I gave up because how many times can you ask the same question, not get an answer? But there are people who just want to avoid any conversation other than particulars. Be like, oh, it's different. It's just different. Well, first, we have to start with, like, this is just how I talk. This is just how I want to get to agreement or disagreement, is to put out building blocks and build together. That's basically what I'm doing. Or destroy together, as the case may be. That's what I like to do, which is, like, first we need to agree, like, what are we even talking about? He's a CIA plant because he worked at McKinsey, because some CIA people supported him. If that's what you mean by a CIA plant, I can concede it and not give a shit. If you mean something else by CIA plant, then great. But I often feel that, like, people just try to not establish those building blocks, and then they can't even concede on, like, very dead simple things like this. Like, the number is higher than it was before. Like, if you're volunteering in an organization, you are by definition in an organization, because that's just what the word means. That's just what the term means, being in something and in something, right? Now, that's a way in which you're in it. You could volunteer in it. You could work for hire in it. You could be working in a combat role, in a non-combat role, but you're in the organization. So whenever those kinds of moments happen where it's like, wait, you can't even give ground on that? You can't even give ground on this? That the statement that Shapiro made was false? That inflation is actually higher? And again, that was an example of a lefty being like, CIA plant, CIA plant, CIA plant. And before, it's this kind of like ultra defensiveness from Shapiro stands or Kyle haters. Again, when I say that, I just mean in terms of my motive, ascribing me with bad motive. When you can't give ground like that, I start to question, is there any substance to this at all? Is this just team sports at that point? Are we really doubting that in a quote volunteer, and you're like, oh, you're just using words. Well, if you're calling out the technical correctness or wrongness of a statement, you can talk about the implication. You can say, oh, it's not really about the definition of that, whether the statement is true or false. It's the implied statement. Well, then talk about that. Don't say the statement. If you don't want to be judged on whether the statement is true or false, don't call that into question. Say that there's another implication here that's clear, that you're clearly missing and that you won't talk about. You get me? And then I'm happy to say, okay, was there a hidden message? Was there an implication? Was there a negative, this or that? I'm happy to engage in that. But you can't accuse someone of being like ultra pedantic on shit when you are contesting the claim. Likewise with this gentleman right here. You know, you're talking about inflation. You're failing to acknowledge empirical reality, and your lack of willingness to just give ground and say, yeah, I guess it's higher right now, but we can't look at it. There's like extenuated circumstances. The problem, the reason he can't say that though, is because you know what the response is. Well, there was extenuating circumstances for Biden's inflation situation, which was COVID, the supply crunch after COVID, which every country suffered through. What's happening now, however, I don't take this war as given in the same way that I take COVID as given, in that this is a war of choice that could have been easily avoided. Likewise, ditto tariffs. Do you get me? Do you get me with all this stuff? So I think, and on the front of the Shapiro conversation, it's like, I think that for some reason, there are certain people, not everyone, by the way, there are a lot of good faith people in their replies as well. I've replied to a bunch of them while I was up and about, that don't want to give ground that, like, yeah, Josh Shapiro as a 20-year-old, like, fibbed on his, or misspoke, or was imprecise in his essay, and therefore he created a false statement. But, like, why wouldn't you just concede that? I mean, like, okay, who cares? I don't care. Do I care that Josh Shapiro talked up his experience in an article? Like, no, I don't really give a shit. All right. You know what? Biden like legit plagiarized. I think this is true, right? That's why he like dropped out of the campaign. Now, obviously very bad to do, horrible thing to do, But it's not going to make it so that it's like top of my mind when I'm considering fucking president. His office was bugged. Yeah, like, but people feel the sensitivity that I'm on the attack, and maybe this is an impression that I get. Listen, I'm willing to acknowledge that I have some fault in whatever. That they don't want to give ground on anything. Like, Shapiro didn't have a false statement, and so when I sense that, I'm like, okay, you won't give ground on anything. What the fuck is the point of the conversation? He found out after moving to a new office. Oh, I don't know if you're talking about that. Okay. Any questions? I might come back later tonight with some more political stuff. Oh, I have a debate lined up on Modern Day Debate, and I think it's against some guy who's, I think I can announce it. Let me just triple check. Who is this guy? He says, consider it booked. If it's booked, I can announce it, right? If they said consider it booked, I think I can announce it. Right? You guys will tell me in the chat. I think that's okay. I don't know which of the Modern Day Debate people are do you guys know who Def Noodles is? Def Noodles? I don't know who Def Noodles is. But it's over, is Trump doing a better job than Dems would? What an easy debate. Didn't he debate Ethan Klein? Should we watch that later tonight? He was on Jubilee versus Isaiah, H3 Orbiter. I don't know who this person is. Heard the name before. Former. That's a Modern Day Debate ass name. Def Noodles. Let's see if there's a... He has 483,000. Oh, so he's a big YouTuber. He's got a face. All right, let's take a look at some of his content just before I leave. Just before we'll do just a little quick YouTube review. A quick little YouTube review. Isn't he running for office? Okay, let's take a look here. Let's take a look here, folks. GOP tries to block me from Congress. Here's why.
Welcome back, folks. Today's video is perhaps the most important one I've ever published on this channel. And the reason
why is my recommended What Pickle Rick Teaches Us About Therapy?
Why is because there is a war happening within the GOP. The battle for control of the party in the post-MAGA era has begun, and I found myself right at the center of it here in California. But this isn't just...
Why is he like copying Fuentes in terms of some of this aesthetic, right? Doesn't Fuentes also have like these two, I don't think he has the MAGA hat around anymore, but he's always has that duality of hats. And just some of the mannerisms. Maybe it's slight, I don't know.
About me. This is about who gets to define what it means to be a Republican going forward. Who gets to participate in this party, and whether we're going to be a coalition that actually wins elections.
Oh, they're talking coalition too. Great.
Or an exclusive club of corrupt insiders who continue losing on purpose to benefit a consulting class that enriches itself by selling hope like...
Oh, they have their own one-party people. They're dead enders.
Snake oil to Republican donors across California.
It's the Uniparty.
Los Angeles.
It's the Uniparty, Charlie Brown.
So here's what just happened. Two major publications dropped articles essentially saying the same thing, that Groypers are now...
Oh, is he a Groyp?
...in the California GOP. That
is he a Groyper?
Be a vetting process to keep certain people...
Wait, then how is he going to argue that Democrats would be worse? I think even Fuentes acknowledges that it's going to be... Maybe he doesn't agree with Fuentes on that. I'll be exploiting that. Debate trick announced. Def Noodles.
...out, and that I, Dennis Feitosa, am somehow an extremist figure tied to this movement. They are naming me directly. They are building a narrative.
He even does those Big sniffs like Fuentes.
Around me. And what you're witnessing here is not journalism. It is coordination. It is a political effort to shape perception before they try to shape outcomes.
Shape perception.
No, this is not.
They kind of sound like previously on, what is that, Legend of Korra? Previously on Avatar? I don't know.
Not random at all. This is part of a broader effort to sideline me politically before voters even get a say. Now let's talk about the smear itself, because I want to be very precise. They are using the label Groyper to paint me as an anti-Semite, a white supremacist, and an extremist. These are very serious accusations, and yet in all of these articles, in all of these quotes, in all of these statements, there's not a single example of anything I've ever said that is anti-Semitic. Not one clip, not one quote, not one post, because it simply doesn't exist. And I want to go even deeper into that, because people keep trying to box me into movements and labels. I don't belong to movements. I don't follow personalities. I'm not a fan of any political figure.
You're completely neutral, Mr. Guy from the neutral planet of Futurama. I don't follow anyone. I don't listen to anyone. I'm my own person.
Fan of one. Jesus Christ of Nazareth.
Oh, my
That's
God.
It. That's who I follow.
Right,
That's
fair.
who I try to model my life after. Not influencers, not commentators, not movements. So when people try to reduce me to some internet faction, it just shows
Can
they
we get
don't
some
understand
praise?
me at all, and are
Praise.
fully committed to smearing me for their own benefit. Now let's also correct the record for a second, because there are straight up.
This is a Groyper hat, the America First hat. I don't just mean that like that he owns the movement or whatever, but I think this is like legitimately a product sold by Fuentes.
Lies in both of these articles. They say I ran a Groyper booth at AmFest. That's patently false. I ran a debate booth. I created a space for open debate where people with different views could actually talk.
Oh, I can't wait to debate this guy.
We had several conversations, debated numerous ideas. We talked about the future of the Republican Party.
I haven't had a good like conservative debate in many moons. Many much moons.
About the tension between different factions in the party. That's called politics. That's called
politics.
That's called engaging with voters. And apparently now that's considered dangerous.
Apparently.
In the Republican Party. Since when did debate become extremism? Now, all that being said, we also need to talk about Elizabeth Barkle-Hahn.
Wait, let's look at his signs again. When did that become extremism? Where's his signs?
Talk about the future of the talk.
Diaz a scam, deport all illegals, feminism, deaf noodles, abortion kills more than guns. I don't see anything anti-Semitic. Honestly, this is bog standard conservative Republican thought, so I don't think that it's extreme. I think he's right about that, and if by that measure of extremity.
We talked about the tension between different factions in the party. That's called politics. That's called.
Well, you aren't going to have a debate with this guy. It's a good debate. Just letting you know. Oh, it's not going to be good? Well, when I say good debate, I just mean like a fun one.
Free speech. That's called engaging with voters, and apparently now that's considered dangerous in the Republican Party.
Oh, maybe I'll do my final TikTok debate thing. Maybe I'll do that.
Become extremism. Now, all that being said, we also need to talk about Elizabeth Barkle-Hahn, because she is a central figure in all of this, and what she's saying publicly in both of these articles is not accurate at all. Barkle-Hahn is the California GOP's chair of Jewish community engagement, and she has been one of the leading voices pushing these false and defamatory claims. She says
it's defamatory that you're a Groyper? See, this is just our opinion, all right? You haven't watched my Ethan Klein lawsuit review. All right, let's try to see if we can find a pure evil. Brian Shapiro crashes out defending Kamala Harris on modern day debate. Oh, this is actually another modern day debate video. Ryan Beard gay.
Well, welcome to Modern Day Debates, everybody. We appreciate you being here. Appreciate your patience getting started.
Holy scuffed.
Not too late. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone we got DebateCon 8 coming up here in July on the 25th, and then we're going to, and the 26th, and we're going to be doing these early bird tickets still, probably like the last week you can get it. It's going to sell out for sure, so come out, meet us. James going to be there.
No more relying on a foreign accent is he foreign?
I'm going to be there. A bunch of great debaters are going to be there. And without further ado, we're going to get into some opening.
Is he like Italian noodles?
statements. I believe Dennis is going to go first, and he's going to give a 5 to 10 minute
Dennis.
opening. Pretty fluid. If you want to concede your time early, you're welcome to do so. And then we'll hit Brian's opening after, get into a 60-minute rebuttal, kind of open dialogue.
60-minute rebuttal?
Opening after, get into a 60-minute rebuttal, kind of open dialogue, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
All right.
So whenever you're ready, Dennis, go for it.
I don't think I could talk for 60 minutes straight. Now, I know I regularly do that, but there's some interruptions there. I don't know in a debate context.
All right. Well, so Trump was a better pick than Kamala Harris. That's the topic we're talking about today. The reason why I believe that Trump was
Oh, this is cheating. This is like getting his roadmap.
a far better pick than Kamala Harris is, well, there's several reasons, right? When you look at Kamala Harris's time as vice president, she was one of the most ineffective vice presidents, one of the most feckless leaders that we've ever had in the history of
Because, of course, we have a big list of vice presidents that are incredibly effective as vice presidents. Basically, the ones, Dick Cheney exerted a great deal of influence. But other than that, I mean, famously, the vice president's position is, not a bunch of power for which there is an ability to succeed or fail. The president doesn't really rise on the input of the vice president, usually.
this country. She was a so-called border czar.
Pisco pretending he doesn't know him as a Red Bar fan is suspect. I don't know this guy as a Red Bar fan. First of all, I like the Joey Diaz Red Bar bits that I see on YouTube. I like the Joey Diaz bits. You guys know the Joey Diaz bits? We are laughing. We are laughing at you. Yeah, so this is my debate opponent.
And absolutely failed at that. And then during the presidential
Wait, what?
She was a so-called border czar. And
oh my God, this border czar. Like, do these guys only talk in memes and like slogans and shit? She was the border czar.
absolutely failed at that. And then during the presidential election, just basically tried to rewrite her record as the border czar. She was also, if you just look at her history within the Democrat Party itself, when she ran for president in 2020, she had absolutely no support from the party. She was the first candidate to drop out. They ended up calling an audible last minute when George Clooney ended up writing an op-ed and basically saying that Joe Biden was no longer a viable candidate. So the entire party decided to coalesce around her.
So is he just giving like a history lesson on like why is this relevant? Yeah, she achieved the candidate status through unconventional means that have never really happened in American history, and she failed at her one election bid. Trump has had another election bid that he failed at. I mean, why is that relevant to what the proposition of the debate is?
Not very democratic of the Democrat Party to do that.
Oh my God.
She was, I don't think she was the first choice for most Democrats. I mean, it was a very interesting thing to witness play out in real time, because you would see on television up until the week before she was announced as she was, appointed as the nominee. You would turn on CNN or any mainstream media source, you would hear a lot of leftists and Democrat commentators, and all of them were in unison basically saying that she wasn't going to be the nominee, that she wasn't going to take the nomination, that she was not going to be a good candidate if she did. And then all of a sudden, when she got nominated, everybody coalesced around her. But outside of her record as a border czar, she also had a very strange position when it comes to the conflict.
He didn't even talk that much about the border and what she did or didn't do
In Israel.
or what she could have done.
And Gaza. I'm sure we're going to get into some of that today. She had her position often kind of changed. It wasn't even a nuanced approach. She kind of tried to hold.
It wasn't even nuanced. I mean, what are you saying? It wasn't even nuanced.
Every position at once. The one consistent thing that she managed to do was she distanced herself from AIPAC. But outside of that,
the one thing that she was able to do on Gaza was distance herself from AIPAC.
She was, I would say she's the perfect example of a corporate politician who stands for nothing and who will just move with the wind.
Oh my God. These are level
career.
one. These are level one. Okay, this should be fun.
And you see that. You see that she is just absolutely awful when it comes to leadership. She will even hurt her own community when it benefits her. The truancy case in Oakland is by far one of the most egregious cases of bad leadership in the history of California. I would go as far to say
truancy.
The fact that she was enforcing truancy laws in Oakland, and she went as far as this young girl was in the hospital, and she had her mother arrested. Absolutely insane. I think that itself disqualified her from leadership, from being.
So let me get this right. Enforcing a truancy law against a mother one time in the way that you're presenting it, by the way, even assuming the way you're presenting it, that is disqualifying for public office. Trump, I'm just going to leave this here, starts an illegal war, fucks up, lets Iran win the war, and is winning the war currently. But to put aside all the corruption, the Qatar plane, the crypto deals, the rug pulls, he thinks the truancy enforcement, it's just like the Burisma stuff where, first of all, there's no even record of a there being with respect to Joe Biden's corruption or anything like that, or any kind of official decision taken in consequence of Hunter Biden's position in Burisma. But putting that aside, even if it were true, to say, oh, this is the biggest political scandal in history, every week Trump does 30 things that are more corrupt and worse than the enforcement of a truancy statute. The interpretation of immigration law and DOJ policy is more deleterious and harder on people who don't deserve it. They've basically gotten rid of all U visas, so they're like undermining victims coming out to get some amount of protection from the state because people who abuse them can hold that over their head as leverage. Like, we're supposed to be allowing for these kinds of people to get relief. And so like, there's just a bunch of situations that occur on a daily basis, which are more harsh, more evil, more corrupt, more untethered from good governance than the enforcements of a truancy statute one time many years ago.
Being in the upper echelons of our government. Right now, she's obviously taking every single major popular position. She's obviously disavowing the Trump's handle of the conflict in Iran. But again, we're going to get into that. I think that there's a lot to say that she would have had a much different approach if we look at her style of governance versus what Trump would have done. I think that Trump's statements during debates were truly prophetic as far as how she would have handled it. She is just a perfect example of weak Democrat progressive leadership. And I think,
I'm sorry, are you against the war or in favor of it? I am definitely going to get clarity on his views.
Honestly, it's good for the Democrats long run that she is on the sidelines, because I've even seen recent studies and polling within the Democrat Party itself that they've acknowledged that somebody like that has no ability to win or govern in America. In fact, some internal Democrat polling is showing that they're leaning towards a white Christian male so that they can hope to win this next presidential election. So, I mean, all you have to look at to see how awful of a candidate and a leader she would have been for the country is to look at how Democrats see her. And that's the purest form of indictment. If your own party
she's the leading candidate in the polls among Democrats, she has approval by the Democrats. I don't understand.
That you're an awful leader, you shouldn't be in leadership, and I think that says it for itself. And that's where I'm going to leave it for now.
Okay. You guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Didn't mention Trump like once, except to say that even Trump said she would be weak.
They're just saying that it froze for a second there, but they could still hear the audio. So I'm trying to turn the bit rate down here and double check to see if turning down the bit rate will actually help here.
Yeah, gotcha. This stream sucks ass.
Kind of annoying. I appreciate the chat being so vocal. Give me 1 second, guys. Second.
You notice Donald Trump is doing. I can tell you, first of all, let me just correct Dennis with respect. Kamala Harris wasn't the border czar, it was Mayorkas, and Kamala Harris in the job of the vice president is not policymaking. That's number one. Number two, right?
Yeah, she wasn't like in charge of setting border policy. This is just something that the media labeled her. And the conservatives ran with it as though she had a portfolio other than like looking to root causes of immigration, which she did. And she used some investment funds, I think, solicited from private entities to invest in the quote unquote root causes. She wasn't trying to apply policy at the border. So it's just a level one meme. It's just a level one meme.
Now the situation that we have in Iran, 100% would not be happening if Kamala Harris was the president of the United States. Now, Kamala wasn't my first, second, or third pick. And in a perfect world, I wish Joe Biden stepped down sooner. But that's not what this debate is about. It's about whether
look at this performative laugh.
Kamala would have been a better candidate.
Okay, this will make it too easy. So let's just the last thing. We'll just find one. Let's see if there's what's the top video. Let's see. Sad man insults poor Filipino family. The ballad. Wait, what is this? Nakado avocado is incredibly rude. Trisha Paytas is out of control. Tana Mongeau cancels Trisha Paytas. Keemstar exposed. Mukbanger is being... What is happening? Where are the debates? What's going on? PewDiePie destroys Travis Scott. Big Ed apologizes. Did he like shift his content? Wait. Papa Gut cancels our debate after 3 minutes.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. So today I was supposed to debate Papa Gut for the first time in about 4 years. Unfortunately, it didn't end up happening. I was genuinely looking forward to the conversation, even though we disagree on a lot and we're on different sides politically. I do think he's an insightful person. I respect that he's engaged, that he cares about politics, that he's passionate about what he believes in. I value conversations with people on the opposite side of the aisle. Now, the debate was originally scheduled for 2 p.m. his time, 11 a.m. my time. Earlier in the day, I had some obligations come up, so I messaged him, and we agreed to push it back an hour. When the new time came around, I messaged him again to let him know that I was finishing setting up and would be live at about 3:05 his time. Now, while I was setting everything up, it took slightly longer than I anticipated, and within minutes, I started getting messages that he had canceled the debate. Now, I'm not here to escalate anything. That's not what I'm interested in. I just want to show you what happened so there's clarity.
I think you for the donation, but I'm not going to ask him about that. I want to stay on topic. This motherfucker better hurry up, though. I'm not trying to fuck around, dude. See what we got here, dude. Right now, it should be 3. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Here's the deal. He said 3:05. So once it hits 3:06 or 7, we're done. Let's see. Clock. Let's look up a clock. Here we go. Let's make it nice and pink. All right, I guess now I go fuck myself. Here we go, guys. Once we're at 3:06.7, we're done. Because frankly, I don't really give a shit, and this is more to his benefit than mine, if I'm being honest with you. This was supposed to be at 2 o'clock. Now we're setting up, and we're gonna be there at 3:05. So I'm probably just gonna this is fucking annoying, to be honest with you. Here we go. Papa Dennis lives in California. I don't care if Dennis lives in California. Does that have to do anything? What? Ask if he's ever loved. That's a great question, man. Yeah, I gotta download it. Well, I know he means the time zones, but it doesn't matter because it was supposed to be 2 p.m. EST. Now it's supposed to be 3. Now it's supposed to be 3:05. Thanks for the 13-month small gut from Lamb Pot. It's still noon in California. Must be sleeping. Yeah, right. Well, he just messaged me. He says he's gonna be there at 3:05. He's in California. As I said, no, he's not saying 3:05 his time. You guys hear me clapping? Beep beep. Maybe he's driving. True. Maybe he's
Why upload this?
3 o'clock. There's the 3. I don't know if it's gonna be a no-show, but I mean, he just keeps pushing shit back. That's what's bothering the fuck out of me.
So you were late?
Lord. All right, guys. 3.
So you were late?
3:06 and 7 seconds. That's it. 3:06 and 7. If there's no response by then, I'm canceling. All right. Thanks for $5 from Big Daddy Bojangles. Ask him if he would ban gay marriage. When he says if the people wanted that, then ask him if he would make 6, 7. Thanks for 31-month small gut from Rissy God. Was that Riz God? Dennis ducking. I don't think he's ducking, but would I rather have a pleasant lunch with them? Those are just a robot. That's fucking crazy. That's wild, brother. That's wild. That's wild work. I don't know. I just can't take just a robot to a fucking pool because if he sees a 16-year-old girl, he's gonna go, oh my God, he's gotta leave the pool. That's what he said. I'll have to leave the pool. Thanks for $2 from Mr. Unlucky. Yes, Dennis, why 6 was afraid of 7. That's a great question. All right, we got another minute and 17 seconds, dude. Another minute and 17 seconds. Bro, if this doesn't go through, I'm just doing the fucking Nick Shirley video. That's what I'm gonna do. Or I'll just play God of War or something. I don't even know. How long do you wait until you decide he's duck? I mean, it's not about ducking. It's about respecting my fucking time, dude. It's supposed to be at 2 o'clock. Then you push it to 3. Now it's supposed to be 3:05. We're now at 3:05. 26. I mean, like he has another 30 seconds to respond, and then I'm just gonna move on because this is stupid. This is a waste of my fucking time. Like, holy shit. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whoa! All right, let's see. I'm not getting any new responses on here. I'm not seeing any new responses on fucking on here. Okay, well, that's it. I'm not doing this fucking whole thing. Yeah, I'm not doing this. This is fucking stupid. Yep, nothing on Instagram. Nothing here. Waste of my fucking time. Waste of my time, dude. Yeah, I'm not playing this fucking game with this guy. I'm not gonna play this fucking game with him. It's stupid. Frankly, it's just dumb. We're gonna do something else. It's kind of irritating, but it's just fucking stupid though. Let's see. I wanted to do the checking this out.
We're just looking for
checking this out here. So yeah, he hasn't even messaged me. So we're just gonna change the title to this. It's stupid, bro. Yeah, it's disrespectful of my time. Like it's childish shit. It's not really. It's frustrating. You know, I have better.
Why upload this?
Things to fucking do. I sat here like I would have streamed at like 1 p.m. I would have streamed 2 hours ago. Instead I'm like fucking around with this. He has his stream set for 3:10. Does he? I'm simply not doing it. Let's see. Yeah, it's not like this is what I'm talking about, dude. Listen. I'm not debating this guy. This is it. This is literally it. We were supposed to have this at 2 p.m. EST. He pushed it back to 3 p.m. today. Then he messages me and says, hey, I'm going to be at 3:05. I'm just setting up now. Now he still hasn't said anything. It's almost 3:10. And he's like debating Papa God after 4 years. I'm not doing this. I have better things to do than to debate.
By the way, I literally did this shit too. I literally did this thing because I had some shit with my internet to the Purple podcast that I was just on. I moved it like an hour before and was like, just give me 5 more minutes to set up or whatever. But I would never, like, I'm not happy I did that. I wouldn't upload this
guy. It helps him more than it helps me. I wanted to have a conversation with the dude, not even like a debate. I sat down and I prepped a bunch of questions to talk about, like really productive things to talk about. Like I want to talk about the SAVE Act. I wanted to talk about a bunch of stuff. But instead, I just keep getting pushed around. It's not worth it to me. It's not worth it to me. It's just like disrespectful of my time. So yeah, I have no interest in this.
He hasn't said a word.
This is not. I'm not vibing on this. Thanks for $5 from James Smith. Maybe if you're irritated, start with the Colbert instead and make sure at least we don't have the crazy crash. I'm not gonna have a crazy crash. Don't worry about it. I'm not gonna have a crazy crash. Yeah, I'm over that. I will never do that again until tomorrow. No, I'm just kidding. Well, hopefully not until tomorrow. Hopefully I don't do it at all. All right, guys. Unfortunately, Def Noodles decided to push the conversation back twice. And we're gonna do the Nick Shirley.
And I communicated that I was running a few minutes behind and that I was finishing my setup.
All right. I don't know why you would upload that. All right, I'm intrigued enough to do gay.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. Now, yesterday I went on the H3 podcast.
Why did he? What is with these gay thumbnails? What is this? Gay, still gay, 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 gay.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. Now, yesterday I went on the H3 podcast and I debated Ethan Klein, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. But first off, if you want to learn more about my campaign, how to donate, or get involved as a volunteer, go to dentistforchange.com. I'll include the links below. I forgot to mention that on the podcast, but I'm mentioning it here. There's more information on the website about how to support, how to volunteer, and what we're trying to build. Now, about the conversation. First off, I thought it was great. We kept it civil. We had a conversation that was about challenging ideas. And though the majority of it was him trying to get me on a gotcha, we were still able to keep it friendly, keep it light, joke around, and talk through serious issues without it turning into a meltdown. Yes, it was technically a hostile environment for me, and he even admitted that. And I'm actually glad he was transparent about that. I do really appreciate that. I respect transparency, even though it was somewhat lopsided.
What is this dude's problem? All right, this will be fun. Okay, any questions before I might come back later to that TikTok thing. So just keep that in mind, folks. No promises, but I appreciate everyone's patience. We're just trying to have fun. Also, I think tomorrow you'll see me in a very interesting setting at around 3 p.m. That's all I can say for now. But more to come. Okay. He's homophobic. The booth he was talking about, the one where people called it anti-Semitic and he denied it. What he didn't show on the screen is behind him is Ben Shapiro is a F slur. I see. So very Groyper coded. I think one way, all right, I'm just signaling what I'm going to do. I'm going to phrase my questions with respect to Fuentes. Like, because I do watch America First and I watch Fuentes, I think I'll have enough to really push that. That was my tactic with Tim Pool vis-a-vis Trump. And I think it worked beautifully. That said, maybe more for me tonight, and tomorrow at most you'll see me for about 30-40 minutes. I won't say what yet, but keep an eye on my Twitter and stuff. Love you guys very much. Talk soon, all right? Stay cool, everybody. Stay libbed. No communism, all right? We don't need that.